On my 20th birthday, my parents took me to a restaurant to tell me they were severing my adoption. My mother smiled, sliding the papers across the table, telling me they only kept me for state benefits and I needed to pack my bags. My father tossed a $3,500 bill in my lap and told me to pay for my farewell dinner. I did not shed a tear. I signed the papers, pushed the check back, and told them the people paying my bill were sitting 3 tables behind them. When my mother turned around, she dropped her wine glass. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever cut off toxic family members. My name is Zuri. I am 20 years old, and for 2 decades I lived as the grateful charity case in the Vance household. In our wealthy Atlanta suburb, my adoptive parents Beatrice and Marcus presented themselves as philanthropists. Marcus owned a lucrative chain of dental clinics, and Beatrice was a leader in an exclusive sorority chapter. They loved the public image of rescuing a foster child. It gave Marcus an angle for his city council campaigns and gave Beatrice bragging rights. But behind the closed doors of their sprawling estate, I was nothing more than a convenient prop for social climbing and a steady stream of government checks. My position was never clearer than on my 20th birthday at a restaurant. The restaurant was a sensory overload of crystal chandeliers and the quiet murmurs of the city elite. I wore a simple black dress bought on clearance. I sat quietly at the edge of the velvet booth, remaining invisible. Beatrice sat across from me, dripping in authentic pearls, while my 24-year-old adoptive sister Chloe sparkled in diamonds. Marcus bought Chloe that necklace last week just for passing her real estate exam. She had not sold a single house yet, but her biological perfection was rewarded simply for existing. The waiter had just set down my steak when a heavy manila folder landed right on top of my plate. The thick paper soaked up the warm peppercorn sauce. I looked up to see Beatrice wiping her fingers on a linen napkin with a look of utter disgust on her face. "Happy birthday, Zuri," Beatrice said, her voice carrying that artificial honey tone she reserved for maximum cruelty. "Those are severance of adoption papers. You need to sign them immediately." I stared down at the folder. The loud chatter of the restaurant faded into a low hum. My heart pounded, but my face remained completely still. Marcus swirled his scotch and leaned back heavily in his leather chair. "The state stipends for fostering a high-risk child ended when you turned 20 last week," Marcus explained clinically. "You are no longer generating any funds for this household. We maintained our fair end of the charitable bargain, but there is no financial reason to continue this arrangement. You are a legal adult now, and your presence is no longer required or desired in our home." Chloe let out a sharp laugh and leaned into her husband Connor. Connor was a flashy 28-year-old man who constantly bragged about being an investment banker. He wore a designer suit that looked a size too tight and an oversized watch that screamed financial desperation. "It is about time," Chloe chimed in, swirling her mimosa and looking at me with disdain. "Mom is hosting the annual charity gala next month, and it is embarrassing having you walk around the estate in those cheap clothes. You drag down the aesthetic of the family. You do not even try to fit in with our circle." Beatrice nodded, her eyes scanning my modest outfit with undisguised contempt. "We kept you fed and sheltered, Zuri. We gave you a roof over your head. But you have always been an ungrateful burden. You refuse to network with the right people, you hide in your room staring at computer screens all day, and you make zero effort to elevate the Vance family name. Now that the state money is gone, your usefulness to this family is entirely gone. Be out of the guest room by tomorrow morning." A normal 20-year-old girl might have broken down right there. She might have cried, begged for a second chance, or asked what she did wrong to deserve being discarded like garbage on her own birthday. I did none of those things. I had stopped expecting any real love from Beatrice and Marcus long ago. I calmly picked up the pepper-stained folder, retrieved a pen from my purse, and signed my name on the dotted line without a single tremor in my hand. I slid the wet folder back across the table. Marcus looked momentarily surprised by my complete lack of emotion, but quickly masked it with a cruel smirk. He gestured to the waiter who brought over the heavy leather checkbook. Marcus did not even bother to open it. He just slid it directly across the table until it hit my water glass. The bill is $3,500, Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. Since you have been saving up all that money working your little data entry jobs, you can cover this. Pay for your farewell dinner, parasite. Consider it a refund for the embarrassment you caused us tonight. I looked down at the black leather checkbook, then up at the family who legally disowned me. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I pushed the checkbook right back toward Marcus. I am legally not your daughter as of 30 seconds ago, I said, my voice smooth and steady. So I will not be paying for your extravagant lifestyle ever again. But do not worry about the bill. The people paying for my dinner are sitting right behind you. On my 20th birthday, my adoptive parents took me to a 5-star restaurant just to slide a legal document across my steak. My mother smiled, telling me they only kept me for state benefits, and I had until morning to pack my garbage and leave. My father tossed a $3,500 bill into my lap and told me to pay for my own farewell party. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly signed the severance papers, slid the checkbook back, and smiled. I told them I was legally no longer their problem, but the people paying my bill were sitting exactly 3 tables behind them. When my mother turned around, the color drained from her face. Before I share the rest of this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut toxic people out of your life to find your true worth. My name is Zuri. I am 20 years old. Growing up in Atlanta meant projecting absolute perfection. My adoptive parents, Beatrice and Marcus, presented themselves as generous philanthropists. Marcus owned a lucrative chain of high-end dental clinics, and Beatrice was the president of an exclusive local sorority chapter. They loved the public praise for rescuing a foster child. It gave Marcus a humanitarian angle for his city council campaigns and gave Beatrice endless bragging rights. But behind closed doors, I was nothing more than a prop for social climbing and government checks. My position was never clearer than on the night of my 20th birthday at the most exclusive restaurant in the city. The restaurant was a sensory overload of crystal chandeliers and quiet murmurs. I wore a simple black dress I bought on clearance, sitting quietly at the edge of the velvet booth. Beatrice sat across from me, dripping in authentic pearls, while my 24-year-old adoptive sister Chloe sparkled in expensive diamonds. Marcus bought Chloe that diamond necklace last week, simply for passing her real estate exam. She had not sold a single house yet, but her biological perfection was always rewarded just for existing. The waiter had just set down my steak when a heavy manila folder landed right on top of my plate. The thick paper instantly soaked up the warm peppercorn sauce. I looked up to see Beatrice wiping her fingers on a linen napkin with a look of utter disgust on her perfectly contoured face. "Happy birthday, Zuri," Beatrice said, her voice carrying that artificial honey tone she reserved for cruel moments. "Those are severance of adoption papers. You need to sign them immediately." I stared down at the folder. The loud chatter of the restaurant faded into a low hum. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my face remained completely still. Marcus swirled his scotch and leaned back heavily in his expensive leather chair. "The state stipends for fostering a high-risk child ended when you turned 20 last week," Marcus explained clinically. "You are no longer generating any funds for this household. We maintained our end of the bargain, but there is no financial reason to continue this arrangement. You are a legal adult now, and your presence is no longer required or desired in our home." Chloe let out a sharp laugh and leaned into her husband Connor. Connor was a flashy 28-year-old white man who constantly bragged about being an elite investment banker. He wore a tight suit and an oversized watch that screamed financial desperation. "It is about time," Chloe chimed in, swirling her mimosa and looking at me with disdain. "Mom is hosting the annual charity gala next month, and it is embarrassing having you walk around the estate in those cheap clothes. You drag down the entire aesthetic of the family." Beatrice nodded her eyes, scanning my modest outfit with undisguised contempt. "We kept you fed and sheltered, Zuri. We gave you a beautiful roof over your head. But you have always been an ungrateful burden. You refuse to network, you hide in your room staring at computer screens, and you make zero effort to elevate the Vance family name. Now that the state money is gone, Your usefulness to this family is entirely gone. Be out of the guest room by tomorrow morning." A normal 20-year-old girl might have broken down right there. She might have cried, begged for a second chance, or asked what she did wrong to deserve being discarded like garbage on her own birthday. I did none of those things. I had stopped expecting any real love from Beatrice and Marcus long ago. I calmly picked up the pepper-stained folder, retrieved a pen from my purse, and signed my name on the dotted line without a single tremor in my hand. I slid the wet folder back across the table. Marcus looked momentarily surprised by my complete lack of emotion, but quickly masked it with a cruel smirk. He gestured to the waiter who brought over the heavy leather checkbook. Marcus did not even bother to open it. He just slid it directly across the table until it hit my water glass. "The bill is $3,500, Marcus said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Since you have been saving up all that money working your little data entry jobs, you can cover this. Pay for your farewell dinner, parasite." I looked down at the black leather checkbook, then up at the family who legally disowned me. A slow and genuine smile spread across my face. I pushed the checkbook right back toward Marcus. "I am legally not your daughter as of 30 seconds ago," I said, looking into his eyes. "So I will not be paying for your extravagant lifestyle ever again. But do not worry about the bill. The people paying for my dinner are sitting right behind you watching us right now." Beatrice's neck snapped back so fast, her fake pearls clattered against the heavy mahogany table. Marcus shifted his heavy frame, turning slowly to follow her terrified gaze. Chloe and Connor mirrored the motion, their smug expressions freezing instantly into masks of pure confusion. The air in the upscale restaurant seemed to evaporate. 3 tables away, sitting in a dimly lit VIP alcove, was a woman who did not need an introduction in this city or any other major financial capital in the world. Josephine Sterling. She was an absolute legend. A towering figure in the global financial sector, an African-American billionaire, and the ruthless chief executive officer of Sterling Global Equity. While Marcus spent his days bragging about owning 6 suburban dental clinics, Josephine bought and sold entire international healthcare networks before breakfast. She sat with perfect, terrifying posture, a glass of sparkling water completely untouched in front of her. She wore a tailored emerald green suit that commanded absolute respect without shouting for attention. Her dark eyes were locked entirely on Beatrice, and they held the cold, quiet promise of total destruction. Slowly, Josephine stood up. The movement was fluid and entirely unhurried. As she took a single step toward our table, 2 towering men in charcoal suits materialized from the shadows, falling into step perfectly behind her. Her elite security detail. They moved with silent precision, parting the sea of wealthy diners like Moses at the Red Sea. Waiters froze mid-step, holding heavy trays of expensive food. Conversations across the dining room died out rapidly, replaced by the harsh scrape of chairs as people instinctively tried to get out of her way. Beatrice swallowed hard, her throat visibly bobbing. Marcus gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. They knew exactly who she was. Everyone who obsessed over wealth and social status knew who Josephine Sterling was. What they did not know until this exact second was why a titan of private equity was walking toward them with murderous intent. Josephine reached our table and stopped. She did not raise her voice to cause a scene. She did not need to. Her whisper was lethal, slicing cleanly through the dead silence of the restaurant. "I have spent 20 years hunting for the people who bought my stolen child." Josephine said, her voice a low velvet hum that made Beatrice flinch physically in her chair. 20 years tearing apart sealed records, fighting corrupt judges, and tracing dark money through offshore accounts. And I finally find her sitting across from a woman wearing imitation pearls and a man who thinks he can buy her dignity with a restaurant check. Marcus tried to speak, but his voice failed him, coming out as a pathetic croak. "What are you talking about?" Marcus managed to sputter, his political polish completely shattering under her intense gaze. "We adopted her legally. We went through the state system. We are upstanding citizens." Josephine leaned down, resting her hands flat on the white tablecloth. Her face was mere inches from Marcus. You went through a corrupt hospital administrator in Fulton County, Josephine whispered. You paid a premium bribe disguised as a charitable donation to an agency that preyed on terrified teenagers. I was a 16-year-old girl from a prominent family. They told me my baby passed away in the night. They handed me an empty box of ashes while they handed you my living, breathing daughter, just so you could secure your monthly foster stipends and your precious political tax write-offs. The blood drained entirely from Beatrice's face, leaving her looking gray and sickly under the crystal chandeliers. She looked wildly from Josephine to me and back again. The physical resemblance was undeniable. We shared the same sharp cheekbones, the same deep brown skin, the same intense, unwavering gaze. The ugly duckling she had verbally abused for 2 decades was a mirror image of the most powerful woman in the room. Zuri is my daughter, Josephine stated, straightening up and shifting her gaze to me. The icy fury in her eyes melted instantly, replaced by a warmth and fierce protectiveness I had never experienced in my entire life. And she is the sole heir to the Sterling Empire. As of tonight, she is coming home. Chloe slammed her hands on the table, breaking the spell. Her face was contorted with jealous rage. She could not stand it. For her entire life, Chloe had been the golden child, the center of the universe. The beautiful biological daughter who got everything she demanded without lifting a finger. The idea that the sister she tormented, the girl currently wearing a clearance rack dress, was biologically tied to billionaire royalty was breaking her fragile reality. "This is a joke," Chloe sneered, her voice shrill and desperate, echoing in the quiet restaurant. "This is some kind of sick prank. Zuri is a nobody. She drops out of community college classes and works data entry. She does not belong in your world. You are making a massive mistake, lady." Josephine slowly turned her head to look at Chloe. She looked at her the way one might look at a stain on a designer shoe. "You must be the daughter they mortgaged their souls to spoil." Josephine noted, her voice dropping another octave. "The one wearing blood diamonds paid for by my daughter's suffering." Chloe gasped, clutching her diamond necklace as if Josephine might snatch it right off her neck. She looked around frantically, realizing she was losing ground fast and looking foolish in front of the city elite. She turned to her husband, her ultimate shield of white privilege and corporate arrogance. "Connor, do something," Chloe demanded, yanking on his sleeve. "Tell her who you are. Tell her she cannot speak to us this way." Connor puffed out his chest and stood up. He adjusted his tight suit jacket, adopting the aggressive stance he used to bully junior analysts and service workers. He completely misread the power dynamic in the room. Blinded by his own entitlement and his ingrained belief that his status was unshakable, he stepped squarely into Josephine's path, blocking her view of me. "Listen here, Lady Connor," said his voice loud and booming, trying to assert dominance over the situation. "I do not care how much money you claim to have or what kind of tragic sob story you are trying to sell to the room. You do not come over to our table and threaten my family. You do not disrespect my wife or my in-laws. I am a senior investment banker at Vanguard Financial. I deal with real money. I sit on corporate boards you could only dream of accessing." Josephine did not blink. She did not take a single step back. Her 2 security guards shifted their weight muscles, tensing under their suits, ready to physically remove Connor from the premises. But Josephine raised a single elegant finger to hold them back. She looked Connor up and down, taking in his cheap swagger, his aggressive posture, and his violently inflated ego. She let the silence stretch, letting his foolish words echo in the quiet dining room. Connor took her silence as submission. He assumed his intimidation tactics were working perfectly. He took another step forward, invading her personal space, leaning in aggressively. "You think you are a big shot? Because you run some private equity firm?" Connor scoffed, a smug, arrogant smile spreading across his face. "You people always think you run the show until someone puts you in your place. Do you know who I am? I can buy your little firm by tomorrow morning." Josephine did not blink at his pathetic threat. She let a soft, melodic laugh escape her lips. It was a terrifying sound that carried the weight of absolute authority. She raised her hand gracefully, and her assistant stepped forward, placing a sleek tablet directly in front of her. Josephine glanced at the screen and sighed. "Connor Wright, you claim to be a senior investment banker at Vanguard Financial. Funny. My system shows Vanguard rejected your application 3 times. You are actually an unemployed day trader pushing worthless cryptocurrency from your basement. And according to this background check, you are currently drowning in $1.2 million of highly leveraged debt. Chloe turned completely pale. She stared at Connor, her eyes wide with sudden horror, as the illusion of her perfect wealthy husband shattered into a million pieces right there in the dining room. She looked at his suit, the watch she thought was a status symbol, and the confident posture she had bought into. It was all fake. Connor turned a violent shade of red. Panic flooded his eyes as his carefully constructed lie unraveled in front of the city elite. He lunged forward aggressively, reaching out to snatch the tablet from the assistant's hands. He wanted to destroy the evidence. He never made it. I reached across the table and caught his wrist mid-air. My grip was like a steel vise. I twisted his arm back just enough to make him freeze in pain. "Do not touch my family's property, Connor," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Especially since you used my social security number to take out a $200,000 fraudulent loan exactly 32 days ago." The entire table fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, throwing the Vance family into a state of total disorientation. The power dynamic in the room had completely flipped. Beatrice was the first to break the silence. She slammed her hands flat against the table, her face contorted with ugly rage. "She is lying," Beatrice shrieked, ignoring the stares of the wealthy patrons around us. "Connor is a successful banker. Zuri is nothing but a bitter, broke college dropout. She is making this all up because she is jealous of Chloe. She has always been jealous of my real daughter." I let go of Connor's wrist and watched him stumble backward, landing heavily in his chair. I stood up slowly, towering over the people who had spent 20 years trying to keep me small. "I am not a dropout, Beatrice," I said, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. "I did not leave community college because I failed. I left because I transferred to the Wharton School of Business. I graduated top of my class a year and a half ago. You would have known that if you ever bothered to ask where I went during the day, instead of just assuming I was a failure." Marcus stared at me, his jaw slack. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "You work data entry." "I work as a senior forensic auditor for a federal financial crimes task force," I corrected him, watching the blood drain from his face. "I track down offshore accounts, shell companies, and wire fraud for the United States government. So when I noticed a sudden drop in my credit score last month, it took me exactly 48 hours to pull the digital thread. I tracked the IP address of the loan application right back to the router in your perfect suburban mansion, Connor. I found the fake Delaware LLC you set up to funnel the cash. I found the forged digital signatures. I have every single timestamp, every wire transfer, and every deleted email you thought you had hidden securely." Connor looked like he was going to vomit. All the arrogant swagger had completely vanished, leaving behind a terrified little boy in a cheap suit. He looked at Marcus, pleading for help. Marcus, however, was a politician and a survivor. He immediately recognized the sheer magnitude of the legal danger they were in. Federal financial crimes meant the FBI. It meant federal prison. It meant the total destruction of his political career and his dental empire. Marcus instantly threw his son-in-law under the bus. "Now hold on a minute, Zuri," Marcus said, holding up his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Let us be completely reasonable here. Beatrice and I had absolutely no idea Connor was involved in any kind of identity theft. We are completely innocent in this matter. We are victims of his deception, just like you are. If Connor stole from you, then Connor needs to face the consequences alone." Connor stared at Marcus in utter disbelief. "You are throwing me to the wolves," Connor sputtered, his voice cracking. "You knew I was struggling. You told me to handle it." Beatrice ignored Connor completely. She pointed a shaking finger at me, refusing to accept her new reality. "You ungrateful little liar!" she hissed, her voice practically vibrating with venom. "I will not sit here and listen to you threaten my family with these ridiculous fairy tales. I am calling the police. I am having you arrested for harassment right now." Marcus grabbed Beatrice's arm so hard she winced. "Shut up, Beatrice," Marcus hissed through clenched teeth, sweating profusely under the warm restaurant lights. "Do not say another word. We are leaving right now. Get your purse. Marcus stood up, pulling Beatrice with him. He tried to project an air of offended dignity, but his eyes darted around the room like a trapped rat. We are leaving this establishment, Marcus announced to the table, trying to sound authoritative. We will sort out this ridiculous misunderstanding with our own legal team tomorrow morning in a civilized manner. Let us go, Beatrice. Chloe Connor, get up. Marcus took a step away from the table, attempting to casually bypass Josephine and her elite security detail. He did not make it far. The two massive security guards stepped sideways in perfect unison. They formed an impenetrable wall of solid muscle and charcoal fabric, completely blocking the exit path. They did not raise their hands or speak a word, but the implication was crystal clear. Nobody was leaving. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. He looked back at Josephine, a nervous sweat breaking out across his forehead. "Excuse me," Marcus stammered, trying to maintain his bravado. "We are leaving. You cannot legally hold us here." Josephine did not even bother to turn around and look at him. She remained seated facing the table, radiating absolute power. She reached forward and picked up her crystal glass of sparkling water, taking a slow, elegant sip. She placed the glass back on the table with a soft, deliberate clink that echoed loudly in the tense silence. "We are not done," Marcus, Josephine said, her voice a smooth, chilling purr that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you can just walk away from what you have done to my daughter? You think a little identity theft is the worst of your problems tonight? You really should pay closer attention to your own business affairs. Tell me, Marcus, who exactly do you think signed off on the state funding and the debt restructuring for your failing dental clinics last quarter?" Marcus stared at Josephine as a heavy bead of sweat traced a slow path down his forehead. He tried to shove his trembling hands into his pockets, but the violent shaking was visible to everyone at the table. His political mask was entirely gone. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, waiting for the lever to be pulled. Josephine signaled her assistant again. The tall woman in the charcoal suit stepped forward and handed a thick blue folder directly to me. I took it without breaking eye contact with the man who had called himself my father for 2 decades. "You really thought you were the smartest man in the room," Josephine said softly. "You thought you found the perfect loophole. $2,000 a month in state foster stipends is petty cash, Marcus. We both know you would never open your pristine home to a child like Zuri just for government pocket change. You did not adopt her for the monthly checks. You adopted her for the activation trigger." Beatrice shot a panicked look at her husband. "Marcus, what is she talking about?" Beatrice demanded, her voice cracking. I opened the blue folder. The crisp sound of the heavy paper flipping echoed in the tense silence. "Before my biological grandfather passed away, he established an irrevocable blind trust," I said, reading the top document. $4 million. The terms were highly specific. Because I was lost in the system, the trust was designed to activate the exact moment I was legally adopted into a permanent home. It was meant to ensure my new family had the resources to give me the best life possible. Marcus swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward the restaurant exit, but the security detail had not moved an inch. "You used your city council connections to access sealed adoption records." I continued, my voice sharp and clinical. "You found the girl attached to a $4 million payout. You rushed the paperwork, you played the role of the generous savior, and the second the judge stamped my adoption decree, you gained full access to my grandfather's money as my legal guardians." "That is a complete fabrication," Marcus choked out, trying to muster a tone of righteous indignation. "We are a respectable family. My dental clinics generate millions. We never touched a dime of any trust fund." I pulled out a stack of bank statements from the folder and dropped them onto the center of the table, right over the remains of Marcus's expensive scotch. "The ink on these pages says otherwise, Marcus. As a senior forensic auditor, I specialize in tracking dark money. It is actually shocking how sloppy you were. You used your dental clinics as a massive washing machine. You generated hundreds of fake vendor invoices, overbilled the state for phantom medical equipment, and funneled my grandfather's $4 million directly into your personal accounts." Chloe grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. She looked from the bank statements to her father. "You stole her money," Chloe asked, her voice a mix of shock and disgust. I turned my gaze to my adoptive sister. "Do not act so morally outraged, Chloe. Where do you think the money went? You have never worked a day in your life. Your credit cards, your European vacations, the massive diamond necklace sitting on your throat right now. Marcus bought all of it with my grandfather's money. He bought your entire lifestyle with my inheritance." Chloe instinctively brought a hand up to her neck, touching the diamonds as if they might burn her. "But even your lavish spending was not enough to drain $4 million, I said, leaning forward. "No, the real drain was Connor." Connor flinched, shrinking back into the velvet booth. He tried to look away, but my eyes were locked onto him. When Connor started hemorrhaging money on his idiotic cryptocurrency ventures, Marcus panicked. He knew if his golden son-in-law went bankrupt, the Vance family image would be destroyed. So Marcus used my trust fund to secretly bail Connor out month after month. "You funded his fake investment banker lifestyle with my money just so you could parade him around at country club dinners and pretend you had a successful family." Beatrice let out a ragged breath. She looked at the bank statements, then at Marcus, who was staring at the floor in defeated silence. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy existence was completely shattered. But instead of showing remorse or apologizing for stealing from the child she was supposed to protect, Beatrice did what she always did. She went on the attack. She slammed her hands on the table and stood up, her chair screeching against the hardwood floor. "So what?" Beatrice screamed, her voice echoing across the silent dining room. "So what if we took the money? We deserved every single penny of it. Do you have any idea what it was like raising you? You were a difficult, stubborn child who never fit in. We clothed you. We fed you. We allowed you to live in a house you could never have dreamed of stepping foot in otherwise. That money was not stolen, Zuri. That money was our payment. It was our compensation for putting up with you for 20 years. The sheer entitlement radiating from Beatrice was staggering. Even the wealthy patrons at the surrounding tables gasped at her brazen confession. Josephine simply smiled, a terrifying, cold expression that made Beatrice slowly sink back into her chair. "You always were terrible at math, Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm against her hysteria. "You see, $4 million is a lot of money, but keeping up the Vance family facade is incredibly expensive. Bailing Connor out of his massive debts drained the trust fund completely empty by the time I was 18. But Connor kept losing money. And you kept spending." Beatrice's eyes widened. She shook her head in denial. "No, we are fine. Marcus has the clinics." "The clinics are failing, Beatrice," I corrected her. "They have been operating at a massive loss for 3 years. When the trust fund ran dry, Marcus had no more stolen cash to launder. But Connor still had creditors knocking on his door, and you still needed your charity gala dresses. So Marcus made a desperate choice." I reached into my bag and pulled out a fresh stack of legal documents. These papers were bound with a heavy red clip. I let them drop onto the white tablecloth with a heavy thud. "You did not just drain my trust, Beatrice," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "When the free money ran out, you and Marcus secretly took out a second and third mortgage on your own estate. You mortgaged your own house to the absolute maximum limit just to keep Connor's debt hidden and maintain your social status. You are completely broke. You are drowning in debt, and your house is currently in default." Beatrice let out a strangled cry, grabbing Marcus by the arm and shaking him. "Tell me she is lying!" "Marcus," she shrieked. "Tell me you did not mortgage the house!" Marcus could not even look at her. He stared at the red folder as if it were a live grenade. "The bank was going to foreclose on you next week," I continued ruthlessly. "They bundled your toxic debt and put it up for sale to the highest bidder on the private market." I smiled, tapping the red folder. "And guess who bought your mortgage?" "I did, Marcus," I said, my voice slicing cleanly through the heavy, suffocating air of the restaurant. "I bought the entire debt portfolio for your failing dental clinics and the primary mortgage on your sprawling suburban estate. I did not use a single dime of the stolen trust fund because you had already bled it entirely dry, bailing out this fraud you call a son-in-law. I used my own earned wealth, the wealth you thought I was too stupid and too insignificant to acquire. As a senior federal forensic auditor, I make a substantial salary with heavy performance bonuses for recovering stolen government assets. And when Josephine and I finally connected last month, and she confirmed my true identity through DNA testing, she gave me full access to Sterling Global Equity's aggressive acquisition backing to finish the job. I stood tall at the edge of the velvet booth, looking down at the people who had terrorized me for 2 decades. The crystal chandeliers above seemed to spotlight me, casting long, sharp shadows across their terrified faces. I felt a surge of absolute power radiating through my veins. If there had been a camera circling me in that exact moment, it would have captured a woman fully stepping into her true identity. The entire dynamic of the Vance family was completely dismantled, and I was the one holding the sledgehammer. I was no longer the quiet foster child hiding in the shadows trying to avoid their cruel remarks. I was the architect of their total destruction. Connor scrambled out of his chair, backing away from Marcus as if the older man had suddenly caught a deadly infectious disease. The polished, arrogant investment banker facade had completely melted away, leaving a panicked, sweating fraud. He threw his hands up in a frantic, pathetic gesture of surrender, his eyes darting wildly between Josephine's towering security guards and me. "It was him!" Connor shouted, his voice cracking in absolute panic as he pointed a trembling finger directly at his father-in-law. "Marcus made me do it. He forced me to sign those loan documents. His dental clinics were completely underwater, and he needed liquid cash immediately to cover up the embezzlement from the state funding. He threatened to cut Chloe off completely if I did not help him wash the money through my personal trading accounts. I had no choice, Zuri. I swear to you on my life I had no choice. He is a monster. I am a victim here. I was just trying to protect my wife." Marcus looked up at Connor, his face turning a dangerous shade of mottled purple. The veins in his thick neck bulged aggressively against his tight silk collar. "You spineless, pathetic coward," Marcus roared, spit flying from his lips as he slammed his heavy fists on the table. "You came to me begging on your knees for a bailout because your idiotic crypto portfolio collapsed overnight. You threatened to leave Chloe and humiliate this family in the press if I did not front you the cash to pay off your loan sharks. Do not you dare try to pin this federal fraud on me. You forged those digital signatures yourself. You set up the fake Delaware shell companies. You are going to federal prison, Connor, not me." Chloe let out a guttural, horrifying sob. Her perfect manicured hands pulled at her hair, ruining her expensive salon blowout. She looked from her red-faced, raging father to her cowardly, sniveling husband, her reality fracturing in real time. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving violently as the truth finally penetrated her thick bubble of delusion. "You are broke!" Chloe shrieked at Connor, tears streaming down her face, ruining her heavy designer makeup. "You told me you were making millions on Wall Street. You told me the yacht we took to the Bahamas was yours. You told me we were moving to the Hamptons next summer. You are nothing but a fake. You do not even have a real job. You are a criminal drowning in debt." Connor tried to reach out to her, but she recoiled violently, as if he were covered in acid. "Do not touch me!" Chloe screamed, her voice echoing off the rich mahogany walls of the restaurant. She turned her furious, tear-streaked face toward Beatrice and Marcus, who were shrinking back into the leather booth. "And you two!" Chloe sobbed, pointing an accusing finger at her own parents. "You are bankrupt. You mortgaged the house to pay for his lies. My entire life is a lie. Everything is gone. My friends are going to find out. The country club is going to revoke our membership. I will be a laughingstock in this city. You ruined my life to cover your own tracks." Beatrice reached out a shaking, trembling hand, trying to comfort her biological daughter. "Chloe, please, sweetheart," Beatrice begged, her voice shaking with absolute despair. "We did it for you. We just wanted you to have the best of everything. We wanted you to shine." Chloe violently slapped her mother's hand away. "I hate you!" Chloe screamed, her voice raw and ugly. "You stole from a billionaire's daughter, and you thought you would get away with it. You are stupid. You are both incredibly stupid, and now I have absolutely nothing." Josephine watched the Vance family tear themselves apart with a look of mild, detached amusement. She did not need to raise her voice or throw a single physical threat. The psychological destruction unfolding before us was absolute and total. She took a slow step back, allowing me to hold the center of the room and deliver the final crushing blow. The loud chatter of the restaurant had completely ceased. Every waiter, every wealthy patron, every manager was watching the dramatic collapse of the Vance family empire in stunned silence. Marcus was holding his chest, breathing heavily. Beatrice was weeping uncontrollably into her linen napkin. Connor was backed against a decorative pillar, looking like a trapped animal, and Chloe was sobbing hysterically over her ruined social status. I looked down at the authentic vintage gold watch on my wrist. The second hand ticked away with satisfying, unhurried precision. I let the silence stretch for a few more agonizing seconds before I spoke again. I looked back up at Beatrice and Marcus, who were now completely stripped of their arrogance, their stolen wealth, and their fake dignity. "You disowned me tonight," I said, my voice dropping to a low, deadly whisper that carried clearly across the remaining silence of the dining room. "You slid those severance papers across my steak and told me I was no longer generating government funds for your household. You told me I had until tomorrow morning to pack my garbage and leave your house." I smiled, a cold, genuine smile that mirrored my true mother's icy confidence. "I think I will speed up the timeline," I whispered. "My eviction team is currently at your house packing your bags." The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow to the chest. He staggered backward, his heavy shoulders sagging as the last shred of his arrogant facade disintegrated. "You," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sudden ringing silence in his own ears. "You bought the debt." "I bought the debt, Marcus." I confirmed, my tone entirely conversational. "I own the paper on your failing dental clinics. I own the title to your cars. And most importantly, I own the primary mortgage on your 6-bedroom suburban estate. You are no longer my adoptive parents. You are my tenants. And you are severely behind on rent." If a camera had been recording the Vance family in that exact second, the footage would have been violently shaky, frantic, and completely destabilizing. The polished, wealthy image they had meticulously projected for 2 decades shattered into jagged pieces. Beatrice let out a sound that was half shriek, half sob. She grabbed her expensive clutch, her hands trembling so violently she dropped it, spilling lipsticks and credit cards across the restaurant floor. Marcus did not even bother to help her pick it up. He turned on his heel, shoving his way past a stunned waiter carrying a tray of champagne. "Get to the car!" Marcus roared over his shoulder, his voice cracking with pure panic. "Get to the car right now." Connor and Chloe scrambled after him like frightened rats fleeing a sinking ship. Connor tripped over the leg of a chair, nearly face-planting into a neighboring table. Chloe was openly weeping now, her mascara running in dark, ugly streaks down her perfectly contoured face. They burst through the heavy brass doors of the restaurant, sprinting into the cool night air, with zero regard for the social elite watching their humiliating exit. They practically threw themselves into Marcus's oversized luxury SUV. The engine roared to life with an aggressive surge, and the tires actually squealed against the pavement as Marcus recklessly cut across 2 lanes of traffic, running a red light in his desperate rush to get back to the suburbs. He was terrified. He was terrified of what he was going to find at the house. Back in the restaurant, Josephine and I did not rush. We did not need to. We moved with the synchronized grace of 2 women who held every single card in the deck. Josephine simply adjusted the cuffs of her emerald suit, nodded to the maitre d', and walked out the front doors. Her security detail flanked us, moving in perfect silent lockstep. Waiting at the curb was a pristine black Maybach, its engine purring softly. The driver opened the door and we slid into the immaculate leather interior. The partition rolled up, giving us total privacy. Josephine poured 2 glasses of sparkling water, handing one to me. We drank in comfortable, quiet solidarity as the Maybach glided smoothly through the city streets, tracking the frantic, erratic path of the Vance family SUV on the GPS screen built into the console. The contrast was almost poetic. Marcus was likely pushing 80 miles an hour, gripping his steering wheel with sweaty palms, his heart hammering against his ribs as Beatrice screamed hysterically in the passenger seat. Josephine and I were riding in total silent comfort, watching the city lights blur past, knowing exactly how this night was going to end. By the time our Maybach pulled onto the exclusive tree-lined street of the Vance family estate, the scene was already one of absolute beautiful chaos. Marcus had parked his SUV diagonally across the manicured front lawn, tearing up the expensive turf in his blind panic. 3 massive commercial moving trucks were parked bumper to bumper, blocking the entire circular driveway. The heavy ramps were lowered, and a team of 12 burly movers, dressed in matching black coveralls, were marching in and out of the massive front doors with ruthless military efficiency. Beatrice was standing on the front porch, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Put that down!" Beatrice shrieked, lunging at a mover who was carrying a heavy antique grandfather clock out the front door. "That is imported from France. You cannot touch my things. Put it down right now or I will have you arrested." The mover easily sidestepped her, ignoring her completely as he loaded the clock into the back of the first truck. Marcus was frantically jiggling his keys into the heavy mahogany front door. He jammed his gold key into the lock, but it refused to turn. The entire lock cylinder had been replaced. Fresh, shiny brass gleamed under the porch lights. "They changed the locks," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with sheer disbelief. He pounded his heavy fists against the wood. "Open the door. This is my house." A man holding a clipboard stepped out of the shadows of the porch. He was the eviction foreman, and he looked completely unbothered by the screaming wealthy family. He calmly handed Marcus a thick stack of legal papers. "By order of the financial institution, holding your defaulted mortgage and the subsequent eviction notice filed at county court, this property has been officially seized," the foreman stated, his voice carrying over the noise. "Your personal belongings are being boxed and moved to a secure storage facility in the industrial district. You have exactly 0 legal right to enter these premises." Chloe fell to her knees on the pristine walkway, sobbing hysterically, as a different crew of movers began carrying out racks of her designer clothes and boxes of her expensive shoes. "My life is over," Chloe wailed, digging her hands into her hair. "Where are we supposed to sleep tonight? We have no money. We have nowhere to go." Connor stood frozen on the lawn, watching his entire false reality burn to the ground. He looked at his ruined wife, his bankrupt father-in-law, and the massive house he had bragged about to all his fake Wall Street friends. Then he saw our Maybach glide to a silent stop at the curb. He saw me step out of the car, standing tall next to Josephine under the glow of the street lamps. I checked the vintage gold watch on my wrist, letting a slow, cold smile spread across my face. "You disowned me tonight," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the chaos of the moving trucks. "You told me to pack my bags and be out by tomorrow morning. I think I will speed up the timeline. My eviction team is currently at your house packing your bags." The sheer, unadulterated hatred in Connor's eyes was palpable. He had been thoroughly humiliated, emasculated, and stripped of his fake wealth by a woman he viewed as entirely beneath him. He could not handle the truth. He could not accept that he had been outsmarted and outmaneuvered. So he resorted to the only weapon he had left in his pathetic arsenal. He banked entirely on his white privilege. Connor reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his smartphone, his hands shaking with a mixture of rage and desperate adrenaline. He looked at the black movers carrying out his things. He looked at me and Josephine standing calmly by the Maybach. His face twisted into a mask of pure malicious entitlement. "I am calling the cops." Connor spat, his voice echoing across the manicured lawn. "Let us see how these movers like dealing with the police. Let us see how smart you feel when the authorities put you in your place." He punched 3 numbers into his screen and lifted the phone to his ear. His eyes locked onto mine with a sickening, triumphant glare. "Yes, 911. Connor barked into the receiver, faking a breathless, panicked tone. "I need squad cars at my location immediately. There is a violent armed home invasion in progress at our estate. A gang of African Americans has broken into our property and they are stealing everything. My family is terrified. We need armed officers here right now. Send everyone." The Steadicam captures every frantic, unhinged movement as Connor paces across the torn, manicured grass, acting the part of the traumatized victim. He runs his trembling hands through his hair, hyperventilating on purpose to sell the performance to the dispatcher on the other end of the line. The camera then smoothly pans away from his pathetic theatrics, gliding over the dark lawn to find me and Josephine. We are stepping completely out of the Maybach, our expressions totally unbothered by the circus unfolding in front of us. The cool night breeze barely rustles Josephine's tailored emerald suit as she stands with perfect posture, observing the Vance family's desperation with clinical fascination. Chloe wipes her running mascara and actually claps her hands together, a vicious, triumphant smile cutting through her tears. She genuinely believes her husband has just regained control of the situation. Beatrice crosses her arms tightly, nodding in furious agreement with every exaggerated lie Connor feeds into the phone. They honestly believe a frantic phone call from an upscale white man in a wealthy suburb will automatically erase my legal paperwork, my federal position, and my newly discovered billionaire mother. They think his skin color and corporate aesthetic grant them total immunity from the consequences of their own fraud. I turned to Josephine, keeping my eyes locked on Connor as he continued to shout hostile directions into his phone. He has always done this, I told her, my voice steady and cold. Every time he feels threatened or even slightly inconvenienced, he weaponizes his race to maintain dominance. I remember when he first started dating Chloe. He called the police on a black delivery driver just for parking too close to his sports car. He threatened the black president of our homeowners association with legal ruin over a minor noise complaint. He uses his skin color and his supposed corporate status as a blunt instrument to terrorize anyone who does not immediately bow to him. Josephine's dark eyes narrowed slightly as she observed him pacing like a caged rat. "And your adoptive parents allowed this behavior?" she asked, her tone laced with absolute lethal disgust. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Allowed it. They practically worshipped it," I replied. Marcus and Beatrice enabled every single microaggression and overt threat. To them, Connor's ruthless entitlement was the ultimate status symbol. Having an aggressive white son-in-law who could intimidate people on command made them feel like they had finally arrived in the elite circles they so desperately craved. They sacrificed my safety and their own dignity just to bask in his toxic privilege. They let him treat me like the hired help in my own home because correcting him would mean risking their proximity to his perceived power. Across the lawn, Connor was putting on the performance of a lifetime. He was practically shouting into the phone now, making sure the dispatcher heard every manufactured detail. "Yes, they are still here," Connor yelled, his voice cracking with faked panic. "They are standing right by a black car. They have a whole team of men clearing out our valuables. My wife is terrified. We are completely defenseless against them. You need to hurry before they get violent." He snapped the phone shut and glared at me. A sickeningly arrogant smirk stretched across his flushed face. "You are done, Zuri." Connor spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You and your fake billionaire mother are going to be in handcuffs in exactly 5 minutes. You really thought you could come to my neighborhood and pull a stunt like this? You just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life." Chloe flanked him, wrapping her arms around his waist, as if he were a conquering hero returning from battle. Finally, Chloe sneered, looking at me with pure, unadulterated venom. "Someone is finally putting you exactly where you belong. You are going to rot in a jail cell for this, Zuri, and we are going to sue whatever garbage company you hired to touch our things." Beatrice nodded vigorously, stepping up beside her golden daughter. "You brought this on yourself." "Zuri?" Beatrice yelled, her voice shrill and unhinged in the quiet suburban night. "We tried to give you a good life, but your true colors are finally showing. You are nothing but a common criminal. The police will see right through your little charade and they will lock you away." Marcus, however, remained entirely silent. He stood near the front door, watching the eviction foreman calmly cross items off a clipboard. Marcus knew the police could not stop a lawful eviction executed by a registered financial institution. He knew the red folder I had dropped on the restaurant table was ironclad, but he was too cowardly to stop Connor's dangerous escalation. He simply stood there, sweating profusely, hoping blindly that Connor's weaponized privilege would somehow magically save them from total bankruptcy and federal prison. The 12 movers in matching black coveralls completely ignored the screaming family. They operated with ruthless efficiency, carrying out flat-screen televisions, designer furniture, and expensive artwork, loading them into the massive commercial trucks. They had dealt with angry evicted tenants before, and Connor's tantrum did not slow their pace for a single second. The eviction foreman glanced at Connor, then looked over at me and offered a subtle, reassuring nod. Everything was strictly by the book and completely legal. But Connor did not care about the law. He only cared about optics and control. He stood on the lawn chest, puffed out, believing his phone call had sealed my fate. He expected me to panic. He expected me to beg for mercy or try to run away before the authorities arrived. Instead, I simply leaned against the cool metal of the Maybach, crossed my arms, looked him dead in the eye, and waited. The distant wail of sirens pierced the quiet night. The sound started as a low hum echoing off the sprawling mansions and manicured hills. Within seconds, the wail multiplied, growing rapidly louder and more aggressive. They were coming fast, and they were coming in force. Connor's smile widened into a manic grin. "Hear that?" Connor taunted, his voice dripping with malice. "That is the sound of your entire life ending." Red and blue lights suddenly bathed the neighborhood in a chaotic, strobing glow. 4 police cruisers skidded around the corner, their tires screeching as they accelerated down the tree-lined street. They did not slow down to gently assess the situation. They drove aggressively, responding to a high-priority dispatch call involving an armed gang home invasion. The cruisers swerved onto the property, illuminating the moving trucks, the Maybach, and the terrified Vance family in the blinding, harsh glare of their headlights and mounted spotlights. The cruisers slammed to a halt at jagged angles across the street and the edge of the driveway. The heavy doors flew open simultaneously. Multiple police officers stepped out of their vehicles, instantly assessing the scene with high adrenaline intensity. Their hands were resting firmly on their holsters, their postures rigid and defensive, ready for a violent and potentially lethal confrontation. The flashing lights cast long, erratic shadows across the lawn, creating a scene of absolute chaos. Connor did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He immediately sprinted toward the officers, waving his arms frantically and acting like a man who had just survived a war zone. He pointed directly past the moving truck straight at me and Josephine, where we stood calmly bathed in the flashing police lights. "Arrest them!" Connor screamed, his voice echoing over the roar of the idling engines. "They are stealing my property!" The lead officer, a heavy-set man with a tight buzz cut, immediately unclipped the retention strap on his holster. He advanced across the lawn with 3 other officers flanking him. They moved in a tactical formation, their eyes darting between the black movers, Josephine's imposing security detail, and me. The flashing red and blue lights painted their faces in sharp, aggressive strokes. Connor kept shouting, feeding the officers adrenaline. They broke in. They threatened my wife. Get them on the ground. If a steady tracking camera were locked onto the lead officer's face in that exact moment, it would have captured a fascinating, rapid evolution of human emotion. He approached us with the hard, uncompromising glare of a man expecting a violent confrontation. He was fully prepared to shout orders, draw his weapon, and forcefully subdue the perceived threat, based entirely on Connor's hysterical narrative. But neither Josephine nor I flinched. We did not raise our hands. We did not shout back. We simply stood our ground beside the Maybach, completely serene. I turned to Josephine, keeping my eyes locked on Connor as he continued to perform for the arriving officers. "He has always done this," I told her, my voice steady and cold. "Every time he feels threatened, or even slightly inconvenienced, he weaponizes his race to maintain dominance. I remember when he first started dating Chloe. He called the police on a black delivery driver just for parking too close to his sports car. He threatened the black president of our homeowners association with legal ruin over a minor noise complaint. He uses his skin color and his supposed corporate status as a blunt instrument to terrorize anyone who does not immediately bow to him." Josephine's dark eyes narrowed slightly as she observed him pacing like a caged rat. "And your adoptive parents allowed this behavior?" she asked, her tone laced with absolute lethal disgust. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Allowed it. They practically worshipped it, I replied. Marcus and Beatrice enabled every single microaggression and overt threat. To them, Connor's ruthless entitlement was the ultimate status symbol. Having an aggressive white son-in-law who could intimidate people on command made them feel like they had finally arrived in the elite circles they so desperately craved. They sacrificed my safety and their own dignity just to bask in his toxic privilege. Josephine did not even bother to make eye contact with the advancing police officers. She gave a microscopic nod to her lead security director. The tall woman in the charcoal suit stepped forward smoothly, her hands completely visible and empty except for the heavy red folder I had produced back at the restaurant. She moved with a calm, deliberate precision that instantly neutralized the frantic, dangerous energy Connor was trying to create. The lead officer stopped a few feet away, his hand still resting heavily on his sidearm. "Nobody move," he barked, trying to maintain control of a scene that was entirely foreign to his expectations. "Who is in charge here? I am," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the idling police cruisers and moving trucks. "And you are currently standing on my private property." Connor let out a loud mocking laugh, looking at the officers. "She is insane. She is a disgruntled foster kid we kicked out tonight. Do not listen to a word she says. Arrest her." Chloe and Beatrice cheered him on from the driveway, their faces twisting with cruel vindication, entirely convinced the police were about to throw me onto the grass. The officer looked at me, his jaw tight, ready to issue a command. But Josephine's security director smoothly extended the red folder toward him. "Officer," she said, her tone polite but laced with unmistakable authority. "Before you make a career-ending mistake on behalf of that screaming man, I strongly advise you to read the documents in this file." The officer frowned, his aggressive glare faltering slightly. He looked at the folder, then at the confident woman holding it, and finally at Josephine, who was watching him with the bored expression of a billionaire who owned politicians. Reluctantly, the officer took his hand off his weapon and snatched the folder. The imaginary tracking shot of his face would show the exact second his aggressive bravado shattered into utter confusion. He flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. The first page was the legally binding transfer of deed bearing the official embossed seal of the county clerk. The second document was the absolute foreclosure notice, completely finalized and executed. The property was unequivocally listed under my name and the holding company established by Josephine's firm. But it was the third document that made the officer's breath catch. It was a direct signed mandate from the district attorney's office. It explicitly authorized the immediate eviction of Marcus and Beatrice Vance, citing an ongoing federal investigation into severe financial embezzlement and fraud. The officer's eyes widened as he scanned the DA's signature. His confusion rapidly morphed into a profound, sinking realization. He looked up from the paperwork, his gaze landing directly on Josephine. The harsh strobe of the police lights illuminated her face, and the officer visibly swallowed hard. He recognized her. Every person connected to city or state power knew exactly who Josephine Sterling was, and more importantly, they knew the immense, untouchable influence she wielded. The officer's aggressive posture evaporated instantly. His shoulders dropped, and his face flushed with a deep, apologetic realization. He snapped the folder shut and handed it back to the security director with a respectful nod. "My apologies, Ms. Sterling," the officer said, his voice dropping to a low, deferential murmur. "We received a call describing a highly volatile home invasion. We were not informed this was a lawful state-sanctioned property repossession." "The call was completely fraudulent," Josephine replied, her voice smooth and chillingly calm. "As you can see, my daughter is executing her legal right to secure her real estate. The individuals screaming on the lawn are the former owners, and they are currently violating a federal eviction mandate." Connor had stopped pacing. He stood frozen a few yards away, watching the exchange with growing panic. He had expected the police to tackle me to the grass. He had expected to watch me be humiliated and dragged away in cuffs while he played the righteous, wealthy victim. Instead, the commanding officer was bowing his head to the woman standing next to me. "What are you doing?" Connor demanded, his voice pitching upward in disbelief. He marched toward the officer, pointing furiously at the movers who were currently loading Beatrice's imported velvet sofa into the truck. "Arrest them! They are stealing my property." The lead officer turned slowly to face Connor. The deferential, apologetic expression he had worn for Josephine vanished, replaced by a cold, hardened glare. He stepped squarely into Connor's path, using his large frame to block the younger man from getting anywhere near me. "Sir," the officer said, his tone entirely devoid of sympathy, "I have just reviewed the legal documentation for this estate. The deed transfer is fully executed. The foreclosure is absolute. The individuals removing the furniture are licensed and bonded professionals acting under a direct order from the district attorney." Connor shook his head wildly, his perfectly styled hair now a messy, unkempt disaster. "No, that is impossible. My father-in-law owns this house. He is a prominent doctor. These people forged those papers. The paperwork bears the county seal and a federal mandate, sir." The officer replied, his voice rising in volume, establishing total dominance over the situation. "In fact, the only person currently breaking the law tonight is you." Chloe let out a strangled gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. Beatrice backed away, her eyes wide with terror, as she looked at the police cruisers that were supposed to be her salvation. Marcus simply stared at the grass, looking like a hollowed-out shell of a man. The officer took another step toward Connor, forcing the investment banker to stumble backward. "You falsely reported an armed home invasion, sir." The officer continued, his voice sharp and loud enough for every neighbor peeking out of their windows to hear. "You tied up emergency resources and attempted to weaponize this department against the legal owner of this property." "Legal owner?" Connor shrieked, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. "She is a broke foster kid. She is nothing. She is the legal owner of this estate," the officer stated, pointing a stern finger at Connor's chest. "And you are currently trespassing on Ms. Zuri's property. You need to step back immediately and leave the premises, or I will arrest you for filing a false police report and criminal trespassing." The reality of the situation finally slammed into Connor with the force of a freight train. His white privilege, his expensive suits, his fake job title, and his weaponized emergency call had all completely failed him. He was standing on the lawn of a house he no longer had access to, drowning in debt, and being ordered to leave by the exact authorities he had called to save him. The humiliation was absolute, and his fragile, arrogant ego simply could not process the defeat. Connor lost his mind. With a primal, enraged scream, he lunged forward. "You stupid, incompetent cop!" Connor roared. He reached out and aggressively grabbed the commanding officer's arm. The instant Connor's manicured fingers clamped down on the dark navy fabric of the officer's uniform, the entire atmosphere of the lawn violently shifted. The restraint the officers had been forced to maintain evaporated in a split second. The commanding officer did not issue another warning. He reacted with the immediate trained aggression of a cop who had just been physically assaulted. "Get your hands off me!" the officer barked, executing a swift, brutal defensive maneuver. He twisted his torso, breaking Connor's grip with a sharp, downward strike of his forearm. The movement was so fast and forceful it knocked Connor completely off balance. But instead of backing down, Connor's bruised ego drove him entirely over the edge of reason. He swung wildly, a pathetic, uncoordinated punch aimed directly at the officer's jaw. He was screaming incoherently, a stream of foul obscenities and privileged demands that blurred into a hysterical roar. The response was overwhelming. The three flanking officers swarmed him instantly. The scene descended into a frantic, chaotic blur of motion. Flashing red and blue lights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the violent struggle in harsh, strobing flashes. Connor thrashed and kicked his expensive Italian leather shoes, tearing up deep gouges in the pristine turf he no longer owned. "Get him on the ground!" the commanding officer yelled, grabbing Connor by the lapels of his custom suit and throwing his weight forward. Connor hit the damp earth with a heavy, breathless thud. The air was violently knocked from his lungs, but he kept fighting, thrashing his head from side to side. "Do you know who I am?" Connor shrieked, his face pressed brutally into the muddy grass. "I am a vice president at Sterling Global. I will have your badges. I will sue this entire department into bankruptcy. Get off me, you mindless thugs." "Stop resisting!" an officer yelled, pressing a heavy knee directly between Connor's shoulder blades, pinning him flat against the lawn. Connor refused to stop. He bucked his hips, trying to throw the officer off, spitting dirt and cursing violently. It took 3 grown men to finally wrench his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed like a gunshot across the quiet suburban street. Connor. Chloe screamed a piercing, desperate wail that tore from her throat. She lunged forward, her expensive heels sinking into the mud, blindly rushing toward the officers in a frantic attempt to save her husband. She reached out her hands, grasping at the empty air, entirely consumed by the delusion that she could somehow intervene. Before Chloe could take another step, Beatrice grabbed her. The older woman's manicured hands clamped down on her daughter's shoulders with surprising, desperate strength, hauling her backward. "Let me go!" Chloe sobbed, fighting against her mother's grip. "They are hurting him. They cannot do this to him. He is Connor." Beatrice did not let go. She yanked Chloe back until they were both standing near the edge of the driveway, shivering in the cold night air. Beatrice was staring at the scene unfolding on the grass with a look of absolute paralyzing horror. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and deeply aged. In that single terrifying moment, a profound and horrifying realization washed over Beatrice Vance. The ultimate white shield she had so proudly paraded around the country club, the aggressive, privileged son-in-law she had used to intimidate minorities and elevate her own social standing, was completely powerless. His money was fake, his job was a lie, and his skin color was not protecting him from the harsh, violent reality of assaulting a police officer. He was a criminal being treated exactly like a criminal. The protective bubble of their elite suburban existence had been permanently shattered. Marcus remained glued to the concrete walkway, entirely useless. He watched the man who had bankrupted him get restrained on his own front lawn, and he did not move a single muscle to help. "Connor, you are under arrest for the assault of a police officer, resisting arrest, and filing a false emergency report." The commanding officer stated, his voice devoid of any emotion, as he hauled Connor roughly to his feet. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Connor was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as the officers dragged him upright. His bespoke suit was ruined, covered in wet grass stains and thick brown mud. A dark red scrape ran along the side of his cheek where his face had been pressed into the ground. He looked wild, unhinged, and completely broken. "I am the victim here," Connor sobbed uncontrollably, his previous aggression entirely replaced by pathetic desperation as the adrenaline crashed. "She stole my house. You are arresting the wrong person. Look at her. Look at them. They are criminals." The officers ignored his hysterical rambling. They gripped his arms firmly and frog-marched him across the ruined lawn toward the closest idling police cruiser. The neighbors who had been peeking through their blinds were now standing openly on their front porches, watching the wealthy, arrogant investment banker get perp walked in handcuffs. Josephine stood beside the Maybach, her expression one of utter serene detachment. She had watched the entire violent scuffle without blinking. The movers carrying items out of the house had briefly paused to watch the spectacle, but the eviction foreman gave a sharp whistle, and they immediately resumed their work, carrying Marcus's expensive wine collection out the front doors. As the officers shoved Connor toward the backseat of the cruiser, he dug his heels into the pavement, refusing to get inside. He twisted his neck, locking his manicured, mud-stained face onto mine. His eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying mixture of hatred and absolute panic. "This is not over, Zuri," Connor screamed, spitting blood and dirt onto the side of the police car. "I will tie you up in court for the rest of your life. I will destroy you." I stepped away from the Maybach. I walked slowly, deliberately across the damp pavement, until I was standing just a few feet away from the open door of the police cruiser. The flashing lights caught the sharp angles of my face. I looked at the man who had called me garbage, who had stolen my grandfather's money to fund his fake lifestyle, who had confidently weaponized a 911 call, expecting me to end up in the back of this exact car. The officers paused, holding Connor against the doorframe, waiting to see if I was going to cause an issue. I simply leaned in, closing the distance between me and the sniveling fraud. "By the way, Connor, I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sympathy. My forensic team just finished compiling the data on your offshore accounts. We sent the unredacted IP logs of your wire fraud directly to the FBI an hour ago. I smiled, watching his eyes widen in pure, unadulterated terror. The local cops are just your opening act. The heavy steel door of the police cruiser slammed shut, cutting off whatever panicked response Connor was trying to formulate. The finality of that sound echoed sharply across the manicured lawn, louder than the idling engines of the commercial moving trucks. The cruiser reversed aggressively out of the driveway, the tires crunching over the pristine landscaping, taking the golden boy of the Vance family straight to a federal holding cell. The remaining officers stayed behind to ensure the eviction proceeded smoothly, their aggressive tactical postures now entirely relaxed as they chatted casually with Josephine's security team. The camera circles Chloe as she falls to her knees on the damp grass. The flashing red and blue police lights wash across her tear-stained face, illuminating the absolute ruin of her perfect suburban existence. Her designer silk dress is stained with dark mud, her carefully styled hair is a tangled mess, and the manicured hands she uses to cover her face are trembling uncontrollably. She is a woman who has spent her entire 30 years gliding effortlessly on the frictionless surface of immense privilege, and she has just hit the concrete bottom of reality. A choked guttural sob tears from her throat as she watches the taillights of her husband's police escort disappear down the dark street. Chloe scrambles to her feet, her expensive heels sinking deep into the torn turf. She rushes toward Marcus, who is still standing frozen on the concrete walkway like a hollowed-out wax statue. She grabs his tailored suit jacket, shaking him frantically with a wild, feral energy. "Daddy! You have to do something!" Chloe shrieks, her voice cracking in the quiet neighborhood. "You need to call your lawyers right now. You need to bail him out. Call the bank and transfer the funds. We cannot let him sit in a jail cell with common criminals." Marcus does not meet her eyes. He stares blankly at the team of movers carrying his imported leather armchairs out the front doors. "Daddy, answer me," Chloe screams, striking his chest with her clenched fists. Marcus finally looks at his golden daughter, his face sagging and gray stripped of all its former arrogant glory. "I cannot," Marcus whispers, his voice dry and hollow as dust. Chloe stops shaking him, her face twisting in utter confusion. "What do you mean you cannot? You are a prominent doctor, you have millions of dollars. Just write a check." Marcus shakes his head slowly, the last remnants of his pride evaporating into the cold night air. "The accounts are frozen, Chloe," he says, his voice devoid of any hope. "Every single one of them. The federal investigators locked everything down this morning when they executed the warrant. The clinic accounts, the personal savings, the offshore funds. We have absolutely nothing. I cannot even afford to pay for a taxi tonight, let alone post bail for a federal wire fraud charge." Chloe stares at him, her mouth opening and closing without a single sound escaping. She has never worked a single day in her entire life. She transitioned seamlessly from a massive childhood allowance directly to Connor's limitless black credit cards. The concept of having $0 of not being able to buy her way out of a problem is entirely foreign to her. Panic sets in a raw and primal terror that overrides her grief. She pivots wildly toward Beatrice, who is hovering near the porch columns, wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the chill. "Mom, your jewelry," Chloe demands, marching toward her mother with a frantic, predatory intensity. "Your diamond tennis bracelet, the emerald necklace Dad bought you in Paris. Give them to me right now. I will take them to a pawn shop. I will sell them to a private dealer. We need cash immediately." Beatrice physically shrinks back from her daughter, her hands instinctively flying to her throat, where a heavy, sparkling pendant rests against her collarbone. "No," Beatrice stammers, taking another step back until she bumps into the brick facade of the house. "You cannot take these. Take them off!" Chloe yells, lunging forward with both hands aimed at her mother's neck. Beatrice slaps her daughter's hands away, bursting into ugly, pathetic tears. The polished elite matriarch of the neighborhood crumbles entirely. "They are not real," Beatrice cries out, her voice shrill and broken. Chloe freezes her hands hovering in the air. What are you talking about? Beatrice covers her face, sobbing loudly, the sound echoing miserably across the empty driveway. They are cubic zirconia, Chloe. The diamonds, the emeralds, the tennis bracelet. They are all fake. I pawned the real ones 18 months ago. Chloe looks as if she has been physically struck with a baseball bat. Why would you do that? She whispers, her eyes wide with horrified realization. Beatrice points a trembling, accusatory finger toward the street where Connor's police cruiser just disappeared. To pay off your husband. Beatrice sobs, her voice laced with deep, festering resentment. Connor came to me begging. He owed over $2 million to illegal sports bookies. He had gambled away your entire trust fund in a matter of months, and he was terrified you would leave him if you found out. He threatened to take you and move across the country if I did not help him cover it up. I sacrificed my own family heirlooms to protect your perfect little marriage, and he just kept gambling anyway. He lost everything. He lost us everything. The absolute silence that follows Beatrice's confession is deafening. The only sound is the rhythmic, mechanical thumping of the moving crew closing the heavy metal doors of the commercial trucks. Chloe stands paralyzed on the lawn as the pieces of her destroyed life fall into place. She realizes she is completely broke. Her supposedly wealthy husband is an addicted criminal who stole her trust fund. Her parents are facing federal prison and bankruptcy. She has no job, no skills, no money, and nowhere to sleep tonight. The carefully constructed illusion of her superiority has been entirely permanently dismantled. Desperation strips away whatever pride Chloe has left. She turns slowly toward me. I am leaning comfortably against the cool metal of the Maybach, watching the destruction of the Vance family with quiet, unbothered satisfaction. Josephine stands beside me, her posture immaculate, observing the pathetic scene with clinical indifference. Chloe takes a tentative step forward, her hands clasped tightly together in front of her chest. Zuri, Chloe whimpers, her voice shifting into a pathetic, childlike plea. The arrogance is entirely gone, replaced by pure, desperate survival instinct. She takes another step, fresh tears streaming down her ruined face, mingling with the mud. Please, Zuri. We are sisters. We grew up together in that house. You cannot just leave me out here on the street. I have absolutely nothing. Please let me come inside with you. Just for tonight. I will sleep on the floor. I promise I will not be any trouble. I beg you. I look at her feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger, no vindictive joy. Just pure, unadulterated closure. I push myself off the car and take one single, deliberate step toward her. I'm sorry, I say, my voice perfectly level and icy. You said my clothes were too cheap for you an hour ago. You wouldn't want to step into my house. Chloe crumpled backward into the mud as if all the bones in her legs had suddenly vanished. She let out a hollow, agonizing sound that was completely devoid of her usual theatrical polish. She stared down at her ruined designer dress, her hands coated in wet earth, finally grasping the absolute finality of my words. There was no safety net left to catch her. Beatrice rushed to her side, kneeling in the damp grass and pulling her weeping daughter into her arms, both of them shivering under the harsh glare of the police cruiser's strobe lights. The camera executes a slow, deliberate push-in on Marcus's face, capturing the exact moment his carefully curated political facade completely melts away. The prominent, esteemed Dr. Vance, the man who had built an entire career on presenting an image of flawless suburban superiority, was sweating profusely. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He ran a trembling hand over his thinning hair, his eyes darting frantically between his sobbing wife, his ruined daughter, and the towering moving trucks systematically stripping his life bare. Marcus realized that brute force had failed. Emotional manipulation had failed. Connor's weaponized privilege had ended in handcuffs. The only arena Marcus had left was the one he believed he controlled, best high-stakes negotiation. He stepped forward, leaving his wife and daughter in the mud. He straightened his tailored suit jacket in a pathetic attempt to regain his dignity and cleared his throat. He did not look at me. He refused to acknowledge the daughter he had treated like a stray dog for 15 years. Instead, he directed his attention entirely to Josephine, mistakenly believing that a fellow member of the elite upper class would understand his language. Ms. Sterling Marcus began, his voice trembling slightly before he forced it into a lower, more authoritative register. Let us speak reasonably. Businessman to businesswoman. Josephine did not move a single inch. She simply arched one perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her dark eyes studying him with the clinical fascination of a scientist examining an insect under a microscope. This entire situation has spiraled entirely out of hand, Marcus continued, attempting to project a calm, diplomatic demeanor. Connor is an arrogant fool who made his own bed, and he will face the consequences of his actions. But my business affairs are entirely separate from his gambling debts. I am a respected medical professional in this city. I own 5 highly profitable state-of-the-art dental clinics across the metropolitan area. They generate millions in revenue annually. Marcus paused, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He swallowed hard, lowering his voice into what he assumed was a confidential, persuasive tone. Let us make a mutually beneficial arrangement. I am willing to sign over the full ownership and operating rights of all 5 clinics directly to your holding company. A complete transfer of assets. In exchange, you ask the district attorney to drop the fraud investigation and you call off the federal agents. You get a highly lucrative medical enterprise added to your portfolio, and my wife and I walk away quietly. It is a clean, profitable solution for everyone, Bull. For a long, tense moment, the only sound was the cold wind rustling the branches of the oak trees. Then Josephine let out a soft, melodic laugh. The sound was not amused. It was razor-sharp and freezing cold. A mutually beneficial arrangement, Josephine repeated, tasting the words as if they were poisonous. Dr. Vance, you are operating under the tragic delusion that you have any chips left on the table to bargain with. Marcus frowned, his forced smile faltering. I am offering you millions in established medical real estate. You are offering me absolute garbage, Josephine stated, her voice dropping into a lethal, commanding register. Zuri is not just my daughter. She is the principal heir to my estate, and an incredibly brilliant financial analyst. When she discovered the discrepancies in Connor's accounts, she did not stop there. She ordered a full forensic audit of every single asset attached to the Vance family name. Do you honestly think we would execute an eviction of this magnitude without doing our homework? Marcus took a step backward, the remaining color draining rapidly from his cheeks. What are you talking about? Josephine stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her presence overwhelmingly dominant. You have not paid federal taxes on any of your 5 clinics in over 3 years, Marcus. You have been funneling the profits through a series of poorly disguised shell companies to maintain your extravagant lifestyle and fund your pathetic city council campaign. The IRS placed silent liens on all 5 of your properties 6 months ago. You have been operating on borrowed time. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His jaw worked uselessly as the oxygen seemed to evaporate from his lungs. My firm purchased your outstanding debt directly from the federal government yesterday morning. Josephine continued, delivering each word with ruthless precision. We own the liens. We executed the seizure clauses at exactly 5 o'clock this evening. The locks on all 5 of your clinics have already been changed by my security teams. The medical equipment the client lists, the physical properties, they already belong to Sterling Global. You literally own nothing. You cannot bargain with assets I have already taken from you. Marcus staggered, his knees buckling slightly as the full weight of his financial obliteration crashed down on him. He raised a hand to his chest, gasping for air. His empire was gone. His legacy was erased. He was a beggar standing on a lawn he did not own, offering a kingdom that no longer existed. Before Marcus could even attempt to form a coherent response, a sharp ringing sound shattered the silence. It was his smartphone vibrating aggressively in the breast pocket of his jacket. Marcus jumped, his hand flying to his chest. He looked terrified of the device staring down at his pocket as if it contained a live explosive. You might want to take that, Marcus, I said, finally stepping forward. My voice was calm, cutting through his panic. I have a feeling it is highly urgent. With trembling, uncoordinated fingers, Marcus pulled the phone from his pocket. The screen illuminated the darkness, displaying the name of his city council campaign manager. He accepted the call, pressing the phone slowly to his ear. "Hello, Marcus," croaked his voice, barely a whisper. The campaign manager's voice was so loud and furious that I could hear it clearly from 3 feet away. "Marcus, what the hell is wrong with you? Turn on the local news right now." "I do not have a television," Marcus stammered, staring blindly at the moving trucks. "What is happening?" "We are finished," the manager screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "The campaign is dead. Someone just leaked an audio recording to every major news outlet in the state. It is a crystal clear recording of you sitting in a restaurant an hour ago. You are on tape, Marcus. You are on tape laughing about how you only took in a black foster kid for diversity points. You literally say, and I quote, 'I adopted a stray from the system to look good for the voters and secure the minority demographic.'" Marcus dropped his hand, letting the phone slip slightly away from his ear. His eyes rolled back in his head. "The press is tearing us apart," the manager continued to shout through the speaker. "The NAACP has already issued a statement. Your donors are pulling their funding. You are a political corpse. I am officially resigning effective immediately. Do not ever call this number again." The line went dead with a harsh click. The phone slipped from Marcus's sweaty grip, tumbling down to hit the concrete walkway with a sharp crack, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of broken glass. The sharp crack of the phone hitting the concrete walkway echoed like a final gavel strike. Marcus fell to his knees beside the shattered glass. He did not try to pick it up. He just stared at the glowing spiderweb screen as his entire carefully constructed universe burned to ash. His political career, his clinics, his wealth, his reputation, all of it was gone. Chloe continued to sob hysterically on the lawn, pulling at her ruined designer dress, oblivious to her father's total collapse. But Beatrice Vance did not fall to her knees. She did not rush to comfort her husband or console her weeping daughter. As the reality of their complete financial and social obliteration settled over the driveway, Beatrice's survival instinct violently kicked in. If Marcus's accounts were frozen by the federal government and Connor was sitting in a police cruiser headed for federal lockup, there was only one lifeline left: the offshore accounts, the hidden, untraceable Cayman Island funds that not even Marcus fully knew the extent of. She just needed the physical ledger with the encrypted passwords, and she could vanish before the FBI knocked on the door. A handheld camera would perfectly capture the frantic raw movement as it tightly tracks Beatrice slipping away into the dark. She moves quickly, abandoning her family without a single backward glance. The tight tracking shot follows her closely as she navigates the narrow side yard, her expensive silk dress catching on the perfectly trimmed rose bushes. She stumbles, her designer heels sinking deep into the damp mulch, but she does not stop. Her breathing is ragged and shallow, echoing loudly in the quiet night. Her perfectly sprayed hair is coming undone, falling into her face as she practically sprints toward the expansive backyard patio. She reaches the heavy glass French doors that lead directly into Marcus's private study. She grabs the brass handle and yanks it violently. It is locked. She shakes it again, letting out a frustrated, desperate growl. She presses her face against the cold glass, peering into the pitch-black room. The floor safe is right there, hidden beneath a loose oak floorboard under the Persian rug. It holds the absolute only key to her escape. Beatrice looks around the dark patio like a cornered animal. Her eyes land on a heavy decorative stone planter resting near the edge of the pool. She kicks off her expensive heels, abandoning them on the wooden deck. She grabs the heavy stone with both hands, lifting it with a sudden surge of adrenaline-fueled strength. She turns back to the French doors and hurls the planter directly at the center pane. The glass shatters with a deafening crash, sending jagged shards raining down onto the hardwood floor inside. Beatrice does not hesitate. She steps through the broken frame, her silk dress tearing on the jagged edges of the door. She ignores the sharp sting of glass cutting into her bare feet. Her eyes are locked entirely on the Persian rug. She drops to her knees, clawing frantically at the heavy wool fabric, pulling it back to expose the oak floorboards. Before her trembling fingers can even pry the loose board upward, the entire patio is suddenly bathed in blinding, harsh white light. The massive exterior security floodlights snap on simultaneously, illuminating the backyard with the intensity of a stadium. Beatrice flinches, throwing her hands over her face to shield her eyes from the sudden blinding glare. "I did not think you would actually leave your husband crying on the pavement, Beatrice," I said, stepping out from the shadows of the garden path. But Josephine told me to never underestimate the pure, cowardly greed of a cornered rat. Beatrice lowers her hands, her eyes adjusting to the harsh light. I am standing at the edge of the patio, completely unbothered by the shattered glass. Flanking me are 4 members of Josephine's private security detail, their postures relaxed but incredibly intimidating. The lead security director, the tall woman in the charcoal suit, stands directly beside me. Resting effortlessly in her hands is the heavy brushed steel floor safe. Beatrice lets out a strangled, breathless gasp. She looks down at the oak floorboards and realizes the hidden compartment is completely empty. "We found it 10 minutes ago," I said, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. When the bank transferred the deed into my name, they also transferred all rights to the physical property and any abandoned assets left inside the residence. My security team sweeps every property I acquire. You really thought a loose floorboard was going to hide your escape fund from a corporate asset retrieval team? "Give that back to me!" Beatrice shrieks, scrambling to her feet, ignoring the blood dripping from her cut heel. "That is my private property. You have no right to touch it. It contains my private medical records. You are violating my rights. Give it to me right now." She lunges forward, but 2 security guards step onto the patio, instantly blocking her path. She slams into them like a bird hitting a window, bouncing off their solid frames and stumbling backward. I let out a slow, humorless laugh. "Medical records," I repeated, shaking my head. "You really are a terrible liar, Beatrice. I expected to find the Cayman Island account passwords. And I did. Those encrypted drives are going straight to the IRS and the federal prosecutors working on Marcus's embezzlement case. You are not flying to a tropical island tonight, Beatrice. You are not going anywhere." Beatrice's face contorts in pure hatred. She opens her mouth to scream another demand, but she stops dead when I reach into my jacket pocket. I pull out a thick stack of aged, yellowed envelopes bound tightly together with a faded ribbon. "I did not just find offshore accounts in your little safe." "Beatrice?" I say, my voice dropping to a lethal frozen whisper. I hold the stack of letters up in the harsh floodlights. The paper is old, the edges worn from time, but the ink on the front of every single envelope is perfectly legible. I look at the return address printed clearly in elegant cursive handwriting, Josephine Sterling. Beatrice stops breathing entirely. The color drains completely from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She takes a slow, trembling step backward, away from the letters, as if they are actively on fire. "These are original letters," I say, stepping carefully through the broken glass, entering the study, to stand directly in front of the woman who made my childhood a living hell. They are dated 20 years ago. They are addressed to the state adoption agency. I stare deeply into Beatrice's panicked eyes, watching the absolute terror take over her soul. Josephine did not just abandon me. I state the reality of the situation, finally crystallizing with sickening clarity. She spent years looking for me. She sent investigators. She sent letters to the agency begging for information about her missing daughter. And the agency forwarded those letters to my registered foster parents, to you. Beatrice shakes her head violently, raising her hands in a pathetic gesture of denial. "I did not," she stammers, her voice barely a whisper. "I did not know." "You intercepted them," I say, my voice echoing off the walls of the ruined study. "You took the letters from the mail. You hid them in your safe. You knew exactly who my birth mother was 20 years ago. You knew a billionaire was desperately searching for her child. But you hid the truth because keeping me as your pathetic little political prop was more valuable to your husband's fake image than my actual life. You stole my mother from me just so you could look like a savior at your country club dinners." I pulled the faded silk ribbon, letting it slip from the stack of aged envelopes, and flutter down onto the floorboards amid the shattered glass. My hands, which had been entirely steady while orchestrating the financial ruin of the Vance family, were now trembling uncontrollably. I unfolded the thick, cream-colored paper of the first letter. The date at the top was exactly 15 years ago. I was 12 years old when this was mailed. 12 years old living in this very house convinced that I was unwanted garbage that the universe had discarded. A tight, emotional two-shot captures the scene framing me and Josephine perfectly together in the harsh, glaring light of the patio. The camera drifts slowly, pushing in by fractions of an inch, isolating us from the chaos of the moving trucks and the crying women on the lawn. It emphasizes the profound, agonizing pain radiating from the fragile pieces of paper in my hands. Josephine stepped into the frame, closing the distance between us until her shoulder pressed firmly against mine. She did not look at Beatrice. She looked only at the letters, her dark eyes welling with a glossy, unshed sheen of tears. The immaculate, untouchable billionaire was gone, replaced instantly by a mother staring at the physical evidence of her stolen decades. I swallowed hard, fighting the thick lump forming in my throat, and began to read her words aloud. My sweet girl. The letter began, the elegant cursive looping across the page. I do not know what they tell you about me, or if they tell you anything at all. But I need you to know that I am fighting for you. Every single day I am building a life for us. I am working to become a woman who can give you the world. Please hold on. Please do not forget me. I love you more than life itself, and I am coming back for you. My voice cracked on the final sentence. A single tear escaped, cutting a hot path down my cheek. I looked up from the paper, staring blindly at the dark trees bordering the estate. I never knew I whispered the crushing weight of the realization pressing down on my chest. I spent every night in the bedroom right above this study, staring at the ceiling, crying myself to sleep, because I thought my real mother threw me away. I thought I was entirely alone. Josephine let out a ragged, trembling breath beside me. She reached out her fingers lightly, grazing the edge of the paper. I wrote to you every week, Josephine said, her voice stripped of its usual commanding authority, reduced to a raw, painful rasp. Every week for 6 years. And then the agency forwarded me your responses. My brow furrowed in deep confusion. My responses, I asked, turning to look at her. I never wrote any responses. I did not even know you existed. My hands shook as I flipped past the first few letters in the stack. Tucked between the cream envelopes were several rough photocopies of ruled notebook paper. I pulled one out. The handwriting was a deliberate, messy scrawl designed to mimic a young teenager's penmanship. I read the words on the photocopy, my blood running absolute cold. Stop writing to me. I know what you are. You abandoned me. I hate you and I never want to see you again. Do not contact me. You are dead to me. I stared at the crude, hateful words, a sickening wave of nausea washing over my entire body. I looked up, locking my eyes onto Beatrice. She was backed up against the brick wall of the house, looking like a cornered, terrified animal. Her breathing was frantic, her eyes darting between me, Josephine, and the security guards blocking her escape. Did you write this? I demanded, my voice dropping into a lethal quiet register. Did you forge a letter from a 12-year-old child telling her mother she hated her? Beatrice pressed her hands flat against the brick, her mouth opening and closing as she desperately searched for a lie that could save her. You were just a child, Beatrice stammered, her voice shrill and defensive. You did not understand the situation. I was protecting you. I was protecting this family. Protecting me, I repeated, taking a step toward her, the crushed glass grinding loudly under my shoes. We had a reputation to uphold. Beatrice shrieked, her own twisted sense of superiority finally bleeding through her panic. Marcus was building his political career. We were a respectable, prominent family in this community. We could not have some unpredictable, unstable woman from your past showing up and disrupting our lives. You were a Vance now. I gave you a roof over your head. I gave you clothes and food. I gave you a respectable life. You owed us your absolute loyalty. You gave me a prison I fired back the decades of suppressed rage finally breaking free. You treated me like an unpaid servant. You used me as a convenient prop to make Marcus look progressive to his voters, and you locked me in my room whenever you had your wealthy friends over so I would not embarrass you. You stole my mother from me to protect your fake, pathetic country club image. Beside me, Josephine's calm, icy demeanor completely shattered. The transformation was terrifying to witness. The calculated, detached businesswoman evaporated in a fraction of a second. For the first time since I had met her, the powerful matriarch of Sterling Global showed pure, unadulterated volcanic rage. The air around her seemed to physically drop in temperature. Her dark eyes turned entirely black, blazing with a fury so intense it made the security guards instinctively take a half-step backward. Josephine moved. She did not walk. She stalked forward like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. She closed the distance between us and Beatrice in 3 long, deliberate strides, stepping directly into the ruined study. Beatrice whimpered, pressing herself so hard against the wall, it looked as though she was trying to merge with the brick. She raised her hands to shield her face, expecting a physical blow. She expected Josephine to strike her to unleash the violence that was radiating off her in palpable waves. But Josephine did not hit her. Josephine stopped mere inches away, towering over the cowering, ruined woman. She leaned in her face so close to Beatrice's that she could speak without raising her voice above a breath. The silence on the patio was absolute, broken only by the sound of Josephine's voice, sharp and lethal as a drawn blade. "Do you have any idea what it did to me, reading those letters?" Josephine whispered, every single syllable dripping with concentrated venom. "Do you know how many nights I spent screaming on the floor of my apartment, clutching pieces of paper that told me my own flesh and blood despised me? I spent 20 years believing I had irreparably broken my daughter's heart. You stole 20 years of my life. You stole my child's childhood." Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing pathetically, her chest heaving as she completely broke down under the crushing weight of Josephine's wrath. "I am sorry," Beatrice choked out. "Please, we have lost everything. You took the house. You took the clinics. We have absolutely nothing left. Let us go, please." Josephine stared down at her, her expression devoid of any human mercy. "I was going to let you walk away homeless." Josephine whispered, the promise hanging in the cold night air like a death sentence. "Now I'm going to make sure you die in a federal penitentiary." The absolute silence that followed Josephine's promise was heavy enough to crush bone. The physical divide between us was stark and undeniable. I stood shoulder to shoulder with Josephine on the elevated marble expanse of the grand porch, bathed in the warm golden glow of the estate's exterior lighting. Down below, stranded on the dark, wet, and thoroughly ruined lawn, stood the remnants of the Vance family. Beatrice, Marcus, and Chloe looked like survivors of a shipwreck, marooned in the mud, entirely stripped of the arrogant armor they had worn for decades. Chloe stared at her mother, her tear-streaked face twisting into an expression of absolute horror. The words "federal penitentiary" echoed in the damp air. Chloe was a woman who had never faced a single consequence in her 30 years of life. She had always been shielded by her mother's ruthless machinations and her father's checkbook. Now, looking at the 2 people who were supposed to insulate her from reality, she saw nothing but dead ends and prison sentences. Her husband was already in a holding cell. Her parents were radioactive. Chloe took a sudden, frantic step backward, physically putting distance between herself and Beatrice. She raised her mud-stained hands, shaking her head violently. "I did not know," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as she looked up at Josephine and me. "I swear to God I had no idea about any of this. I did not know about the letters. I did not know they were stealing your trust fund money, Zuri. I had absolutely nothing to do with this." Beatrice snapped her head toward her daughter, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief. "Chloe." Beatrice gasped, her voice barely a raw whisper. "Do not talk to me," Chloe screamed, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly at her mother's chest. "You are a monster. You ruined everything. You lied to everyone, and you dragged me into this mess. Zuri, please, you have to believe me. She is insane. She is a criminal. You can send her to prison. She deserves it. Just please do not punish me for what she did. I am innocent." The betrayal was instant and absolute. The ultimate golden child. The daughter Beatrice had worshipped, pampered, and committed federal crimes to protect, had just thrown her directly to the wolves to save her own skin. Beatrice stood paralyzed, the last remaining pillars of her sanity crumbling into dust. She had pawned her real diamonds to pay off Chloe's degenerate husband. She had manipulated Marcus's accounts to maintain Chloe's lavish lifestyle. She had hidden my existence from my birth mother just to ensure Chloe never had to share the spotlight. And this was her reward. A primal, anguished cry tore from Beatrice's throat. She lunged forward, raising her hand and slapped Chloe across the face with everything she had left. The sharp, violent crack of flesh against flesh echoed like a gunshot across the quiet suburban street. Chloe stumbled backward, crying out in shock, her hand flying to her rapidly reddening cheek. "You hit me!" Chloe wailed, her voice pitching into a hysterical screech. "You actually hit me! You ungrateful, pathetic, useless little brat!" Beatrice screamed, advancing on her daughter like a rabid dog. "I sacrificed my entire life for you. I committed fraud so you could parade around your country club pretending to be royalty. You have never worked a single day in your life. You are nothing without me." Marcus, finally snapping out of his catatonic shock, rushed forward and grabbed Beatrice by the shoulders, yanking her away from Chloe. "Stop it!" Marcus bellowed, his face purple with rage. "Both of you shut your mouths right now. Are you trying to make this worse? The police are literally down the street. The press has my audio recording. My career is completely destroyed. My life is over." Beatrice ripped herself out of his grip, turning her fury onto her husband. "Your career was a joke, Marcus. You were a spineless, pathetic man who needed me to run every single aspect of your miserable life. You could not even handle a simple audit without falling apart. You are weak. You lost the clinics because you are an idiot." I stood on the porch with Josephine, watching the flawless elite Vance family completely implode. The mask of suburban perfection was entirely gone. They were tearing each other apart like starving animals fighting over a rotting carcass on the muddy lawn. They screamed obscenities, aired decades of hidden resentments, and blamed each other for their collective ruin. It was a spectacular, pathetic display of complete moral bankruptcy. There was no loyalty. There was no love. There was only greed and self-preservation. Josephine did not smile, but a profound look of satisfaction settled over her striking features. She had not needed to raise a hand to destroy them physically. They had done the heavy lifting themselves. We simply removed the foundation of lies they had built their lives upon, and gravity did the rest. The chaotic screaming match on the lawn was abruptly interrupted by the heavy, authoritative sound of tires rolling over the wet asphalt. A massive, sleek black SUV with heavily tinted windows pulled up to the curb, stopping smoothly directly behind Josephine's Maybach. The headlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the muddy lawn and forcing Beatrice, Marcus, and Chloe to freeze in their tracks, shielding their eyes from the glare. The engine idled with a low, powerful hum. The heavy driver's side door clicked open, and a tall, imposing figure stepped out into the cool night air. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit that fit his athletic frame perfectly. He carried himself with the exact same predatory, effortless confidence as Josephine. As he stepped into the ambient light of the street lamps, his striking features became clear. He was a young African-American man, no older than 25, with a strong, square jaw and intense, calculating eyes that immediately locked onto mine. He did not spare a single glance for the screaming, muddy mess of the Vance family on the lawn. They were completely beneath his notice. He walked deliberately up the driveway, his expensive leather shoes clicking rhythmically on the pavement, completely unfazed by the chaos surrounding him. Josephine turned to me, her dark eyes softening with a warmth I had never experienced from a mother figure before. A genuine, radiant smile touched her lips as she looked at the young man approaching the marble stairs. "Zuri," she said, her voice dropping into a soft, melodic tone that commanded absolute attention. "There is someone you need to meet. I would like to introduce you to Malik Sterling. He is my son, which makes him your biological older brother." The camera drops to chest level, locking onto Malik in a smooth, continuous tracking shot as he glides up the damp driveway. He moves with the terrifying, frictionless grace of an apex predator stepping into an enclosure of wounded prey. The mud, the flashing police lights down the street, the frantic sobbing of Chloe in the background, absolutely none of it registers on his face. He is an absolute force of nature, a 25-year-old corporate titan wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that absorbs the harsh glare of the floodlights. As he passes the ruined Vance family, the sheer gravity of his presence forces them into a stunned, breathless silence. Marcus actually shrinks back instinctively, pulling his ruined suit jacket tighter around his frame. Malik does not even spare them a downward glance. He ascends the marble stairs of the porch, stopping directly in front of me. Up close, the resemblance is undeniable. He has Josephine's sharp, calculating eyes, but the curve of his jaw and the subtle warmth in his expression mirror my own. For a long, suspended moment, he just looks at me, taking in the sister he has been searching for his entire adult life. "Hello," Zuri, Malik says. His voice is a rich, resonant baritone that instantly commands the space. I have waited a very long time to say that. He steps forward and wraps his arms around me. It is not a hesitant, polite greeting. It is a fierce, fiercely protective embrace that anchors me completely. After 20 years of living in a house where affection was a transactional currency, the sheer, unconditional weight of his grip makes my breath catch in my throat. When he finally pulls back, his hands drop to my shoulders, grounding me. He reaches into his jacket pocket and retrieves a sleek silver flash drive, pressing it firmly into the palm of my hand. I close my fingers around the cool metal. "What is this?" I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "That is the rest of your life." Malik answers, a sharp, brilliant smile touching the corners of his mouth. It contains the untangled deeds to the offshore properties, the rerouted intellectual property rights for your financial algorithms, and the newly established Sterling Family Trust. You are officially insulated from the blast radius of these parasites. "Wait just a minute," Marcus croaks from the lawn, his bruised ego momentarily overriding his common sense. He takes a stumbling step toward the porch, his hands raised in a pathetic attempt to regain control. "You cannot just walk onto my property and start talking about trusts and offshore accounts. Zuri is a Vance. We raised her. We put a roof over her head. You have absolutely no legal right to interfere with her assets." The smile vanishes from Malik's face. He turns slowly, walking to the very edge of the marble steps and looking down at the broken man in the mud. The affectionate brother is replaced by the ruthless corporate lawyer in a fraction of a second. Dr. Vance, Malik states, his tone ringing out with the crisp surgical precision of a courtroom executioner. "You are currently speaking to a senior partner at Vanguard and Hayes. I specialize in hostile corporate acquisitions and punitive litigation. And as of 8 o'clock yesterday morning, I am also the lead plaintiff's counsel on the civil suit that has just been filed against you and your wife in federal court." Beatrice lets out a strangled gasp, clutching the torn fabric of her muddy silk dress. "A civil suit. We do not have any money left. Josephine just took everything. Josephine took what you owed the federal government." Beatrice, Malik corrects, stepping down one marble stair. "I am taking what you owe my sister." The suit outlines 20 years of sustained emotional distress, child endangerment, and systematic wage theft. "Wage theft!" Chloe shrieks from the grass, her face a mask of bewildered fury. "She lived here for free. We fed her. We clothed her." "You enslaved her," Malik fires back, his voice cracking like a whip, silencing Chloe instantly. "We have sworn affidavits from the country club staff, the neighborhood association, and your own former housekeepers. They all testify to the fact that Zuri was forced to act as unpaid domestic labor while you paraded her around as a charity case. You used her to clean up after your parties, manage your household accounts, and balance Marcus's fraudulent clinic ledgers. That is involuntary servitude disguised as foster care. But that is not even the best part." Malik continues, his dark eyes locking onto Marcus. "Did you honestly think a forensic accountant like Zuri would not leave a digital trail? We found the tax returns, Marcus. We found the heavily redacted forms your accountant tried to bury in the Cayman servers." Marcus begins to shake uncontrollably, his knees visibly knocking together. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Yes, you do," Malik says, his voice dropping into a lethal, terrifying cadence. He descends another step, towering over the ruined patriarch. "You claimed my sister as a specialized medical dependent for 15 consecutive years. You fabricated a series of chronic illnesses and developmental disabilities, submitting forged psychiatric evaluations to the state. You drained hundreds of thousands of dollars in specialized foster care subsidies and federal disability grants, funneling every single dime directly into your campaign fund and Connor's illegal sports betting accounts. Beatrice lets out a horrified, guttural wail, covering her ears as if she can block out the truth of her own crimes. Marcus simply stands there, his mouth opening and closing, completely devoid of oxygen. Malik does not blink. He does not show a single ounce of mercy. He stops on the bottom step, looking directly into Marcus's terrified, bloodshot eyes. You used my sister as a tax write-off, Malik states, delivering the final crushing blow. Tomorrow morning, your face will be on the front page of every newspaper in the state. I've personally made sure of it. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but his jaw simply worked silently up and down. The sheer crushing reality of the federal crimes, the tax fraud, and the complete obliteration of his carefully manufactured political career paralyzed his vocal cords. He looked like a man who had just been informed that the ground beneath his feet had ceased to exist. A smooth, unbroken Steadicam shot begins a slow, sweeping circle around the dark, wet lawn, tracking the physical and emotional isolation of the ruined family. The camera glides effortlessly at chest level, capturing the muddy, pathetic cluster of Beatrice Marcus and Chloe stranded in the center of their ruined yard. As the camera revolves, it reveals the widening perimeter of the spectacle. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers blocking the street had already shattered the quiet suburban night, but the sheer volume of the screaming match and Malik's booming, authoritative voice had been the final catalyst. Porch lights began to flick on, one by one, illuminating the pristine, manicured driveways of the exclusive Oakwood gated community. The heavy mahogany doors of the neighboring estates swung open. Out stepped the very people Beatrice Vance had spent 2 relentless decades desperately trying to impress. The country club presidents, the local politicians, the wives of corporate executives, and the surgical partners Marcus had constantly courted for campaign donations. They emerged from their million-dollar homes, wearing expensive silk bathrobes and cashmere cardigans, stepping cautiously onto their immaculate front walkways. And every single one of them was holding a smartphone. The faint, unmistakable cold glow of dozens of screens illuminated the neighbors' faces in the darkness. They were recording. They were capturing every single second of the spectacular muddy downfall of the Vance family in high definition. Beatrice slowly turned her head, her breath catching in a ragged gasp, as she realized the perimeter of the lawn was lined with an audience. The horror that washed over her face was entirely different from the fear she had shown Josephine. Losing her stolen wealth was devastating, but losing her social standing, being exposed as a fraud in front of the elite society she worshipped, was a fate far worse than death. She let out a high, panicked shriek, throwing her mud-stained hands up to shield her face from the glare of the screens. "Stop it!" Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking as she stumbled backward, her expensive designer heels sinking deeper into the ruined grass. "Eleanor, Richard, put those phones away right now. This is a private family matter. We are victims of a corporate misunderstanding. Please, you cannot record this." Eleanor Kensington, a prominent socialite whose garden parties Beatrice had spent years relentlessly clawing her way into, stepped forward to the edge of her perfectly trimmed hedges. She did not lower her phone. Instead, she let out a sharp, icy, condescending laugh that cut through the humid night air with absolute precision. Private Eleanor mocked, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated disdain. "Beatrice, your husband's fraudulent clinics were just raided by the FBI on live television 30 minutes ago. You are standing in a pile of mud wearing a torn dress screaming at your own daughter. You look like a feral animal." Beatrice let out a strangled whimper, wrapping her arms around her stomach as if she had been physically struck. "Eleanor, please, we have been friends for 15 years. I helped you organize the charity gala." "We were never friends," Beatrice Eleanor replied, her tone turning lethal. "I tolerated you because Marcus occasionally paid for the expensive champagne at the club. But we all knew you were a fraud. We all knew you were living on credit and stolen money. You spent 20 years pretending to be royalty while treating that poor foster girl like an indentured servant. You have always been the biggest joke in this neighborhood, and watching you finally get what you deserve is the best entertainment we have had all year." A chorus of mocking laughter and murmured agreements rippled down the street from the other neighbors. Another voice, a wealthy corporate developer who Marcus had heavily relied on for political endorsements, called out from his driveway. "Save the political spin, Marcus," the man shouted, holding his phone up high to capture the ruined doctor. "You are a spineless embezzler. Do not bother calling my office for a character reference when the federal prosecutors come knocking. I am sending this video straight to the local news stations." Marcus visibly shrank, his shoulders collapsing as the absolute certainty of his social and professional obliteration settled over him. He covered his face with his hands, turning his back to the street, completely unable to meet the eyes of the men he had once considered his peers. Chloe, desperately trying to salvage whatever tiny shred of her own reputation remained, attempted to physically run away from her parents. She scrambled toward the edge of the lawn, holding her hands up in surrender toward the neighbors. "I had nothing to do with this," Chloe cried out, slipping on the wet grass and nearly falling onto her knees. "They lied to me too. My husband was manipulated by them. Please do not group me in with them. I am innocent." "Oh, shut up, Chloe," a younger woman from the neighboring house yelled back, completely devoid of any sympathy. "You are a fake heiress whose husband just got arrested for illegal gambling. The only thing you are innocent of is doing an honest day of work in your entire life." I stood on the grand marble porch, flanked by Josephine on my left and Malik on my right. My true family, an impenetrable wall of support and absolute power. I watched the elite society Beatrice had worshipped systematically tear her apart, stripping her of every single lie she had ever told. The justice was poetic, brutal, and entirely deserved. I turned my head slightly, catching the eye of the lead security director standing near the heavy glass doors of the estate. I gave her a single subtle nod. The director signaled two of the movers who were waiting silently in the grand foyer. The men stepped out onto the porch, moving past Malik and Josephine with practiced efficiency. In their hands, they carried 4 heavy, cheap black plastic garbage bags. They walked down the wide marble stairs, marching straight toward the muddy lawn. Without a single word, the movers hurled the heavy bags directly at Beatrice's feet. The bags landed with a loud, wet, final thud, splashing mud onto her torn silk dress. Beatrice stared down at the cheap plastic bags, her entire body shaking as she looked back up at me with wide, terrified eyes. I stepped forward to the very edge of the marble steps, looking down at the woman who had stolen my childhood, stolen my mother, and treated me like disposable garbage for 2 decades. My voice was calm, steady, and entirely devoid of mercy. "The movers packed your essentials." I stated the words, carrying clearly over the lawn. "The rest of the furniture is being donated to a foster care charity tomorrow." The heavy plastic garbage bags settled into the wet earth with a sickening squelch, the cheap material tearing slightly on a rogue twig to reveal a jumbled mess of Beatrice's basic toiletries and a few pairs of practical non-designer shoes. The stark reality of those black bags sitting on the ruined lawn was the final nail in the coffin of the Vance family legacy. The neighbors standing on their pristine porches and driveways did not gasp in sympathy. They zoomed in with their smartphone cameras, capturing the absolute degradation of the woman who had spent 2 decades looking down her nose at everyone else. Before Beatrice could even process the indignity of her belongings being tossed onto the grass like literal trash, the distant wail of sirens tore through the quiet suburban night. The sound did not build slowly. It amplified with terrifying speed, echoing off the million-dollar homes and shattering whatever fragile silence remained. Flashing blue and red lights violently washed over the scene, bouncing off the shattered glass of the patio doors and painting the manicured oak trees in harsh, strobing colors. The camera pushes in quickly on Marcus's defeated face. The arrogant, untouchable doctor looks entirely hollowed out, his skin turning a sickly shade of gray under the relentless glare of the approaching lights. His jaw trembles, his eyes wide and vacant as he stares down the street at his impending doom. 3 black, unmarked federal SUVs turned sharply onto the cul-de-sac, moving with aggressive, coordinated precision. They did not park politely against the curb. They angled themselves directly across the Vance driveway, completely barricading the property. Following closely behind them were 2 marked local police cruisers, their sirens cutting off abruptly as the vehicles slammed into park. The heavy doors of the SUVs swung open simultaneously. 6 men and 2 women wearing dark tactical windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI emblazoned across their backs stepped out into the humid night air. They moved with absolute authority, their hands resting naturally near their tactical belts as they advanced up the driveway. Malik stood beside me on the marble porch, casually adjusting his expensive silk tie. "I told you Dr. Vance," Malik said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the hum of the idling engines. "Vanguard and Hayes does not just file civil suits. When my forensic team uncovered the extent of your tax evasion and the interstate wire fraud you used to hide my sister's trust fund, we felt a moral obligation to share our findings with the federal prosecutor's office. They were incredibly grateful for the encrypted ledgers we provided." The lead federal agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a severe, unforgiving expression, marched directly onto the muddy lawn. He completely ignored the audience of wealthy neighbors filming the spectacle from the sidewalk. His eyes were locked squarely on Marcus and Beatrice. "Marcus Vance and Beatrice Vance." The agent barked, his voice echoing like a gavel striking a wooden block. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest. You are being charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement, and the theft of a federally protected trust fund." Marcus let out a strangled, breathless sound. The final shred of his manufactured reality snapped. The man who had built an entire career on maintaining a calm, authoritative bedside manner completely lost his mind. He looked at the federal agents closing in around him. He looked at Malik, who was watching him with a cold, predatory smirk. And then Marcus Vance did the most pathetic thing I had ever seen a human being do. He turned and ran. It was not a graceful escape. It was a panicked, flailing sprint through the slick, rain-soaked mud. Marcus scrambled toward the heavy wrought iron gate at the side of the house, his expensive leather loafers slipping wildly on the wet grass. He threw his arms out, gasping for air, looking like a cornered rat trying to scramble up a smooth wall. He did not even make it 5 yards. 2 federal agents closed the distance instantly. One of them lunged forward, grabbing the collar of Marcus's ruined designer suit jacket and yanking him backward with brutal force. Marcus let out a high-pitched yelp as his feet flew out from under him. The second agent tackled him around the waist, driving the prominent, respected doctor face first into the thick, dark mud. "Do not resist," the agent shouted, pressing his knee firmly into Marcus's back. "Put your hands behind your back right now." Marcus thrashed weakly in the mud, spitting out grass and dirt, sobbing uncontrollably as the cold steel handcuffs were forcefully ratcheted onto his wrists. He was completely broken, pinned to the ground of the estate he no longer owned, while the neighbors he had courted for political donations filmed his arrest in high definition. Beatrice watched her husband get driven into the dirt and her legs simply gave out. She collapsed onto her knees in the mud, the tearing silk of her ruined dress soaking up the freezing water. The immaculate, terrifying matriarch who had controlled my every waking moment was gone. She was a hyperventilating, shivering mess, surrounded by the black garbage bags containing her only remaining possessions. "Chloe!" Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking into a raw, desperate shriek. "Chloe, you have to help us. Call Anderson. Call the firm. Tell them to send a defense attorney right now. Get the emergency credit cards from the safe. Chloe, do something." Chloe stood near the edge of the driveway, completely untouched by the mud. She looked at her mother kneeling in the dirt with mascara running down her face. She looked at her father currently being hauled to his feet by 2 federal agents, his face covered in wet earth. Then she looked at the neighbors, observing the absolute disgust and mockery in their eyes. Chloe realized in that exact moment that the Vance name was no longer a shield. It was a contagious disease. She took a slow step backward, physically distancing herself from the wreckage of her family. "I do not know you people," Chloe said, her voice dripping with venom and self-preservation. "You are criminals. You lied to me my entire life. I am not calling anyone for you. I am not going down with you." Chloe Beatrice wailed, reaching a trembling, mud-caked hand toward her daughter. "Please, you are my little girl. I did everything for you. Every single thing I did was for you. I never asked you to. Chloe snapped her face, twisting in pure disgust. You deserve this. Without a single backward glance, Chloe turned on her heel and walked away. She marched straight down the driveway, pushing past the federal agents and ignoring the flashing lights of the cruisers. She disappeared into the dark suburban night, actively abandoning the parents who had worshipped the ground she walked on. Beatrice let out a guttural, agonizing scream, collapsing forward until her hands buried themselves in the mud. She sobbed hysterically, her entire body shaking as the remaining federal agents stepped forward to pull her up by her arms. "Ma'am, stand up," the agent commanded, his grip completely devoid of sympathy. They hauled Beatrice to her feet. Her dress was ruined, her hair was plastered to her wet face, and her wrists were immediately pulled behind her back to be cuffed. As the cold metal clicked into place, locking her into her new reality, Beatrice whipped her head around. She looked past the agents, past the flashing red and blue lights, and locked her eyes directly onto mine. I stood on the marble porch, safe, elevated, and entirely surrounded by the family that had fought for 2 decades to find me. Josephine's arm was wrapped tightly around my waist, and Malik stood tall beside me, a silent, immovable guard. For the very first time in my entire life, I saw Beatrice Vance cry real tears. They were not tears of manipulation or performative victimhood. They were tears of absolute, profound terror. The realization that she had thrown away the only person in her house who actually possessed a moral compass finally hit her. "Zuri, please!" Beatrice begged, her voice breaking into a pathetic, ragged sob as the federal agents began dragging her toward the waiting SUVs. "Zuri, you have to tell them to stop. Please do not let them take me. I raised you. I took you in when nobody else wanted you. Zuri, please. I'm your mother." The camera pushes into an extreme close-up of my face, the harsh red and blue strobes of the police cruisers dissolving into a soft, chaotic blur of bokeh in the background. The frantic symphony of the screaming neighbors, the barking federal agents, and Beatrice's pathetic, breathless sobbing completely fades into a muted hum. I am entirely isolated in the frame. My expression is utterly stone cold. I do not blink. I do not waver. I step off the grand marble porch, my heels clicking sharply against the stone as I slowly descend the stairs toward the muddy lawn. The federal agents pause for a fraction of a second, instinctively stepping back to give me space as I stop inches away from the ruined, handcuffed matriarch. Beatrice looks up at me from the dirt, her tear-streaked face a mask of desperate, pathetic hope. She honestly believes she can still manipulate me. She actually thinks the 20 years of psychological conditioning, the decades of transactional affection, still hold weight. I reach into the inner pocket of my blazer. I do not pull out a handkerchief to wipe her tears. I pull out the crisp, legally binding severance document we finalized at the restaurant, the very paperwork she so eagerly signed to financially sever me from her fake inheritance. I unfold it slowly, holding it up so the harsh police lights illuminate her own frantic, greedy signature at the bottom of the page. "You are not my mother," I state, my voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register that cuts through the night air like a blade. "You are a warden who simply ran out of federal funding." I step closer, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. "You said it yourself, Beatrice. You only kept me for the benefits. You used my existence as a tax shield to fund your country club memberships and buy designer dresses while making me scrub your floors. But the federal grants dried up. The tax loopholes closed. The money is completely gone. Now you are not useful." Beatrice lets out a strangled, breathless gasp. The realization finally shatters the absolute last fragment of her delusion. She is not a victim. She is a parasite that has just been surgically and permanently severed from its host. I do not give her the satisfaction of another word. I turn my back on her, leaving her kneeling in the freezing mud surrounded by the cheap garbage bags of her own making. I walk back up the marble steps, my posture perfectly straight, my head held high. When I reach the top of the porch, I do not spare a single backward glance at the flashing lights or the ruined family being shoved into the back of the federal vehicles. I lock my left arm firmly through Josephine's elbow and my right arm through Malik's. We turn as a single, unbreakable unit. We step over the threshold of the grand estate the house that my brilliant, unyielding, true family secured for my future. The heavy mahogany doors swing shut, locking with a definitive echoing thud closing on Beatrice Vance forever. The heavy mahogany doors slam shut, the echoing thud signaling the absolute end of an era. The scene instantly shifts, the harsh sirens and freezing rain replaced by total serenity. The camera opens on an extreme close-up of my face, completely isolated by a soft, blurred background. I am not shivering. I am not muddy. I am wearing a tailored ivory silk suit, my hair perfectly styled, bathed in the warm golden sunlight of a late Sunday afternoon. Slowly, the Steadicam begins to pull back in a smooth, continuous dolly out, revealing the breathtaking living room of the actual Sterling family estate. High vaulted ceilings, modern art, and massive windows overlooking a private coastline fill the expanding frame. I look directly into the camera lens, breaking the invisible wall between myself and the audience. It has been exactly 6 months, I state, my voice calm, rich, and entirely at peace. It is absolutely fascinating how quickly a dynasty collapses once you expose the fraudulent foundation it was built upon. I cross my legs, resting my hands comfortably in my lap as the camera continues its slow, deliberate retreat. Marcus and Beatrice did not even make it to a trial. The encrypted ledgers I provided to the federal prosecutors were airtight. They both pleaded guilty to wire fraud, extreme tax evasion, and the theft of a federally protected trust fund. They are currently serving 15-year sentences in separate federal penitentiaries. Connor tried to leverage his parents' crimes for a lighter sentence, taking a plea deal that landed him in a minimum security facility. He is completely bankrupt, buried under a mountain of illegal sports betting debts he will spend the rest of his life failing to repay. A small, sharp smile touches the corners of my mouth. And Chloe, the fake heiress who could not boil water without assistance, finally learned the value of $1. She was evicted from her luxury apartment and now works double shifts at a greasy roadside diner on the edge of the county. She lives in a weekly motel, scrubbing tables and serving coffee to the exact type of working-class people she spent her entire life mocking. The camera pulls back far enough to show the rest of the room. Malik sits on a plush leather sofa to my right, reviewing a legal brief while Josephine stands by the window smiling warmly at me. As for me, I reclaimed my entire $4 million trust, along with 2 decades of heavily compounded interest. But the money is simply a tool. Malik and I officially launched a specialized nonprofit organization. We utilize forensic accounting and aggressive litigation to audit the state foster care system, protecting vulnerable children from the exact financial abuse I endured. Josephine finally has her daughter back, and I finally have the home I was always meant to live in. I reach over to a silver tray on the side table and pick up a crystal flute of vintage champagne. I raise the glass directly to the camera lens, my eyes locking onto the audience with absolute, undeniable victory. They tried to throw me away on my 20th birthday, but they did not realize they just handed me the match to burn their fake empire to the ground. Cheers. I take a slow sip of the champagne. The camera glides smoothly backward, pulling away through the grand archways of the estate, letting the bright sunlight gradually soften before fading into a perfect silent black.